have to have visionaries. You know, you have to have people that will think outside of the norm.
We're getting access to viewpoints and to people and to connection that we never, ever would have.
We have to believe change is possible in order to bring it about.
Having integrity in yourself and in your work, that is success.
We are our own leaders. We all are responsible for the change that we want to see.
It's about a broader question of representation. Who gets to define how we see the world?
It's the power of sharing and connecting and vulnerability.
How do we intentionally rebuild a sense of community?
Every single person around the world can create a movement.
Please welcome Executive Vice President of AtlanticLIVE, Candace Montgomery.
Good morning, everyone. As they said, I'm Candace Montgomery, Executive Vice President and General Manager of AtlanticLIVE, and I welcome to our 7th annual People versus Cancer. Thank you all for joining. This year, we will examine stories from the front lines of cancer care, featuring the people impacted most, patients and survivors. We will also hear from practitioners and researchers about their work to revolutionize the industry and lead with a diversified, patient-centered approach. And we'll explore patient-led and community-based strategies for prevention, healthy survivorship, and the race toward a cure. Before we get started, I want to thank our underwriter, PhRMA, for their support of the Atlantic's journalism today. A few practical notes: please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. We want you to be a part of the conversation on social. When posting, please use the hashtag #PeopleVCancer. I would like to also remind all of you tuning in at home that you can participate in some of the conversations online via the Q&A tab on your screens. Please tell us where you are from, and if you submit a question for one of our speakers, we will do our best to incorporate it into the conversation. Enjoy the program.
For our discussion on survivorship in America today, please welcome W. Kimran Rathmel, Director of the National Cancer Institute, with staff writer for The Atlantic, Yasmin Tayag.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. And Dr. Rathmel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's jump right in. I want to begin with what survivorship in America looks like right now. You know, what trends are we seeing in the data?
Well, thank you. So first, I'm really thrilled that this program's been put together with such an amazing set of speakers that includes people from advocacy groups and stakeholders. So survivorship is a huge part of the cancer continuum, and I'm delighted that we get to talk about that. I'll tell you, I'm a medical oncologist. Sorry, is the microphone okay? So I'm a medical oncologist. My focus has been on kidney, bladder, prostate, testicular cancer. I'll touch on some of those because they cover very different pieces of the cancer journey where survivorship is different in these, and that can be expanded to the whole heterogeneity of cancers. So really excited to talk about survivorship. I thought I would do one thing before we start.
Sure, please.
Because there are 18 million cancer survivors in the United States today. That number is expected to only increase because we're seeing advances in cancer care, and people living with cancer, and people being cured with cancer. So I thought I'd ask, I'm sure that we have cancer survivors in our audience today, if I can find out who's a cancer survivor.
Wow,
so
amazing.
Great, we have a lot of cancer survivors here, so this is gonna be a great discussion.
Yeah. So could you talk to me about the trends that you're seeing in when it comes to outcomes? You know, what's got you excited?
So there's so many things that are exciting in this space because people are, so I'll start with, again, some of the cancers that I treat. So kidney cancer has really been at the core of my work. And when I started 20 years ago, kidney cancer really didn't have any effective therapies. Metastatic kidney cancer meant a survival of 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, really probably not more. And it was biology that led to novel therapies, more and more therapies, people living not 1 year but 2, not 2 years but 4, and then immunotherapies, and now people that we can say confidently are cured. And so that's paradigm changing and changes the way that you have a conversation with a patient, and you have to really think about what about the next 20 years for them, and think about going from expecting something terrible in a short period of time to a complete reorientation, and how do they enter the life that they had before. And they've had a lot of therapy, and so how do we think about their risks for other health diseases? Yeah. And so it's a field now, because there are so many people who have survived cancer. It's a very specialized field because it depends on the treatment that you had. It depends on the kind of cancer that you had. It depends on the issues. Some are very health focused, some are social, some are emotional, some are financial. This experience of having gone through a cancer diagnosis and moving into after cancer diagnosis, it was something we really didn't think about before.
Yeah, and it's incredible that we're at a place where we can be thinking about life after cancer. And with that in mind, how have these trends shaped your priorities going into your directorship at the NCI?
Yeah, so the responsibility of the NCI is to, well, first, we have the Cancer Moonshot, so we have goals. So our goals are to reduce mortality from cancer by 50% by 2047. That's going to be prevention, early detection, better therapeutics, doing better in the care of all of that, and bringing care and access to patients everywhere. But the other part of the Moonshot is improving the experience of living with cancer. And that's where a focus on survivorship, for example, helps us as the NCI take that very, very seriously. We need to do good research. There's biology that we need to understand there. There's pharmacology that we need to understand. There's social medicine aspects that we need to understand. And so bringing the science there, just like it brought us innovations in treatments and novel therapies, will also bring us insights into how we do better in taking care of patients.
Right. And, with the goal of the Cancer Moonshot, there's a clock, 2047.
Yes.
That means we've got to be working quickly. How are you thinking about making that happen?
Yeah. So I think the point that you made there first is actually the essential, is that we can't be patient anymore. So we have to be impatient. We have to be willing to think about how we can do any part of the system differently. So we need to look at where there are bottlenecks, where there are processes that just move too slowly because of a system that was designed around a different expectation for cancer, around different types of treatment for cancer. That's not where we are today. We're just like any other industry, and we have to pivot and be able to take that forward. I think one of the things that's most exciting is a new recognition of how important it is to listen to patients, communities, and stakeholders. They know what it is, especially in the survivorship realm. But I think this is true across the cancer continuum. In the area of survivorship, what do we need to focus on? We need to ask patients. And those of us who take care of patients know that they will bring that forward. Mm-hmm. They will tell you what it is that feels like is missing. So we need to listen. We need to be able to give more voice to patients and patient groups to focus our work. So all of those things together is how we're going to make a big difference.
Right. And I know you've done a lot of work in patient advocacy. Could you tell us about your experience there and how you hope to bring in those groups how you hope to collaborate with those groups?
Yeah, we can't do any of the work that we do without patient advocacy. I mean, we're doing this for patients. We're doing this for the health of our population, and so we have to have those groups giving us direction and giving us some of the fuel to move forward. So I'll tell you a really quick story about how I really got involved in advocacy. And it's a story a little bit about where there are significant disparities in our healthcare system. So when I was a young physician, kind of putting my flag down on kidney cancer, I met a young man who came to my clinic, 18 years old. Let me tell you, that's not normally what you see for metastatic kidney cancer. 18 years old, young black man. He's a senior in high school. He's in the choir, very interested in becoming a physician, or a musician. Actually, I wanted him to be a physician. And he has a big 15-centimeter tumor in multiple metastatic sites. And the doctors in his local community, who are several hours from the academic center in North Carolina. So he's from rural North Carolina. His doctors have tried, and nothing seems to be working. Well, first of all, lots of red flags go off. 18 years old, this is not run-of-the-mill kidney cancer. This is the first case that I ever saw as a kidney cancer doctor of renal medullary carcinoma, a very rare variant that only happens in young people, only happens in people who carry a sickle cell gene, so sickle cell trait. So I don't blame the doctors that were taking care of him before. I'm sure I had never seen it. I'm sure they had never heard of it. And so that changed the way that we've treated this patient. There is still today no long-term effective treatment for this cancer. So while we were able to extend his life for a time and help him to get through high school, we didn't do enough. His mom really had a big impact on me. So when he was at the end of his life, I went to their home, and she sat me down at their kitchen table and said, none of this was fair. The pediatrician didn't even understand that this was cancer because he's 18 years old. The rural healthcare that they were a part of wasn't fair because he didn't have access. The fact that he was black was a disparity. She was a single parent because his dad had sickle cell disease and got HIV from a blood transfusion and had died when he was 5. So there was also a disparity in his social network. Yeah. And all of and he had a rare disease. So our system is not built for rare diseases. So all of these things were so unfair. And she said, you just can't let this keep happening. And so I did what I know what to do, which is to write a paper. And because I'm an academic, that's all I know how to do. And that paper got noticed by an advocate. And that advocate then encouraged me to talk to a lot of other folks and everyone who knew about renal medullary carcinoma, which was like 40 people. Mm-hmm. And today, there's an active alliance. Today, there's active research. Today, we understand the biology in a different way. Today, that cancer is a part of the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative that we endorse at the NCI. And today, there's real hope for these patients. And today, there's a network so that they can much more rapidly be identified and be connected to expert care. So to me, the advocacy network is really the fiber of everything that allows us to make good forward progress.
Right. You know, one theme that's really coming out in what you've been telling me is this need for alliance and network and collaboration. I know beyond patient advocacy, the NCI is hoping to partner with groups both nationally and internationally. Can you talk to me about what those partnerships look like and what their aim is?
Yeah, absolutely. The era that we're in today is one of really open collaboration across space, and I am just delighted that that's true. First, that is a mandate of the Cancer Moonshot, is that this is for the United States. And you asked about international, I will get there. But that this is all of government, that nobody's doors are closed when we're talking about a cancer initiative. That's really, really powerful. In terms of it being a new era, I'll just share an analogy that I used when I talked about this at the AACR. So I'm from Nashville, and we all love Taylor Swift. And so anybody go to the Taylor Swift concert? I actually didn't. You should go. But I haven't gone either. But I watched the video, so you can watch it on Netflix. And so Taylor Swift talks about the eras and how her music evolves over time. So medicine evolves over time as well. And there was an era where it was very top-down, where whatever the doctor said is what you do, and it's you and your doctor forever. The same thing in science, top-down. More recently, we've been in an era where we recognize that collaboration is important. Multidisciplinary care teams, conferences where you bring together surgeons, radiologists, pathologists, medical oncologists, and put together the best patient care plan. Certainly science, because science has become so complicated and so big, you have to have the biochemist and the geneticist and the data scientists all working together. So that's been normal for some time. The era that I described is one that's really holistic, 360. Everybody is in this together, including patients, including communities, including advocacy groups. And so examples of where we can do really powerful things together. We're talking about survivorship today. Yeah. The new report laying out a framework for how organizations, institutions should approach survivorship came from a collaboration between the NCI and the Veterans Affairs Administration.
Amazing.
The VA has incredible resources to think about how you deliver patient care. The NCI is a science-driven organization. You put that together and just think about what you can do. So, that's just one example. And then when you think about internationally, so we have very active collaborations around the world with similar organizations, and we can take on big projects. For example, with Cancer Research UK, the Grand Challenges can take on big projects like looking at disparities in cancer genomics worldwide. And we can think about prevention. I really think that prevention is where we'll get the biggest headway. The best cancer is a cancer that you never have. And we have an opportunity to not see HPV-driven cancers anymore, right? To not see cervical cancer, to not see head and neck cancers. Yeah. And that's thrilling. And we have to be able, just like approaching an infectious disease, to work worldwide and to be able to learn from who's doing it well, we can't do this in isolation. We have to do it all together.
Yeah, it sounds like there's perhaps an analogy to be drawn here to what we learned during COVID and all of the research that and collaboration that went into making a vaccine very fast.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the COVID pandemic gives us a lot of opportunities where we learned and where we can draw on when we think about what a transformed era for cancer research could look like. So in that era, or in that I can't use era too many times. In the period when the COVID pandemic was really intense, we opened trials very quickly. We learned how to manage clinical trials in more remote spaces. One take-home from that is, can we do more things virtually? Can patients receive some of their clinical research, if they're a part of a study, in their home or in their hometown with a local provider? Some of that we have to learn how to do, and we did it when we had to. We can do it more efficiently so that we can bring these ideas more quickly back to the point that you said earlier, we just can't wait.
Yeah.
We have to be urgent about how we do this, and that means accepting that not every patient will drive 2 hours to the Mecca. They have to be able to be in we have to bring the research to them. And then the other piece that has to be on the horizon is that clinical research is part of clinical care. It is not something that happens with some doctors in some settings, but that it is acceptable as a normal part of how we approach taking care of patients. Because, I don't know about you, I've been doing this for a while, I can't think of a cancer today where we know everything, there is nothing that we could do better, there is no room for improvement. So when I say we should have more clinical research in our clinical care, I don't mean that everybody needs to be on a phase 1 clinical trial. We have lots of good therapies that we know how to do, but even in those cases, we could learn how we do the survivorship piece better. We could learn how we manage components of the care better. So there's one of the things that's been so fun to be the NCI director is I can think about every part of the cancer continuum has space for us to work in. Mm-hmm. And so we really have just an opportunity to approach all of this so differently.
Yeah. You've been talking a lot about the taking advantage of virtual options, and I wanted to talk to you about how you're leveraging technology and new breakthroughs and helping pick up the pace of progress in cancer.
Yeah, let me just tell you about one initiative that we have at the NCI that I'm really excited about. It's called the Virtual Clinical Trials Office. This is an initiative that was born from the resourcefulness of folks during the pandemic. So, and also one of the challenges that emerged from the pandemic, which was a staffing shortage. So centers really struggle to have the staff that you need to be able to do a clinical study. You have to have somebody who can do the enrollment, testing, people could do the data. A lot of those people don't have to be boots on the ground. They're largely working through the electronic healthcare record. They may have to interact with the patient, but in a way that could very much be done, and I'm using this is my Zoom hand, that can be done virtually. And so looking at which ones of those components can be most transportable. How do you utilize a limited resource, which is our manpower and our expertise, and distribute it much more widely? And take, and for example, a study coordinator who's deeply expert in a study and not have them be at one center, but have them working with patients at a whole bunch of centers. Mm-hmm. So it's not rocket science. We should have been doing this all along. We're learning a lot about how you do it. There are complexities, but it's definitely going to be the way of the future.
Right, and it seems to me that this is going to go a long way in helping address disparities in clinical trial involvement. We all know here that there are a lot of underrepresented groups in our clinical research on cancer. Can you talk to me about other approaches that the NCI is taking to addressing those disparities?
Yeah, we can't accept anymore that level of disparity, that people are underrepresented and their data about their group, their disease is not a part of our lexicon. So, I'll start with an anecdote and then talk a little bit about what the NCI is trying to do to address this. So just one tiny example is that because of underrepresentation in genetic data, individuals from diverse groups might have mutations in genes that are otherwise, so when you first get a gene detected as a mutation, we don't always know right away, like, aha, that's it, that's really a driver. There's a lot of noise in the genome. And so there's a lot of things that are called variants of undetermined significance, right? Kind of like the rodents of unusual size, if you know that reference. But so we don't know what they mean. We're like, this looks suspicious, but we don't know. And so they get coded as this is uncertain, okay? And so if a demographic is not well represented, they will have more things that are uncertain that are actually real. So I had a patient, she had a syndrome of kidney tumors, that's how I got to meet her, but also tumors in her eye, tumors in her brainstem. She's a physician, and that constellation of tumors, rings a bell. That's a hereditary syndrome that I also treated, that she was also familiar with as a doctor, and so the two of us are like, well, I think this must be the syndrome, so let's send off the test. Today, there is a drug that you can give if you can document the syndrome that will control these tumors.
Wow.
Well, it comes back and it says there's only one variant of undetermined significance. And she and I are both like, this is real. We know it's real. How do we prove it's real? And we had no way to prove that it was real. Mm-hmm. And several years later, the company we had sent the test to came back and said, aha, it's a real mutation, right? So had that been in a different circumstance, she could have been told, no, you don't have this. Had it been a different circumstance, someone might have looked at a variant that's not real and said, oh, this must be real. So having the depth of the data is helpful, okay? So what are we doing? So first of all, we're looking at our data sets, and we're making sure that we're capturing as broad a representation as possible. I mentioned the one study that's being launched through the Cancer Grand Challenges. That will take a really deep look at African genomes from across the continent of Africa, because of course there's variation as well. You can't just look and say, black, white. There's a lot of gray in here. There's a lot to study. We need much bigger resources of data sets and depth of information. And so we are looking at ways that we get that data and make it accessible, link data sets. So that's probably the biggest thing that I'll say. We're also really interested in trying to make access to clinical trials be a real reality. I mentioned the virtual clinical trials office. We think that will be an important asset in our toolbox. But we realized early, I've been in the job 6 months, so within the last 6 months, that we really didn't have enough information about how we reached all of America. And so we started with a working group, and we partnered with the American Cancer Society. So it's co-led by an oncologist who is in the community. He's an NCORE leader, and someone from the American Cancer Society. We have the VA, we have the Indian Health Service, we have CMS, and they are doing a deep look at our capacity and where there are opportunities that today we could break down a barrier and make things move, and where do we need to build something that's new. And so I'm really excited to see what this group brings together. I've never seen a committee that has such diversity of representation and that is so committed to, this is I've not given them an easy job. But the initial steps will be things that we can act on quickly, and I think that they will, bring us opportunities that will take us way into the future. I'm so excited.
Fantastic. One of the reasons it's so important to be tracking such a diversity of populations is because there are, unfortunately, emerging trends in cancer prevalence and, that are happening in certain groups. One I'm particularly concerned about is the rise in lung cancer diagnoses in Asian women, or rising prevalence of cancers in young people. What do we know about these trends, and how is the NCI adapting to those?
So cancer has always been an evolving disease. So first of all, this is not new that it changes, but it does have a feel that things are changing pretty rapidly. So one is that we have, so the NCI is a lot of different things. The NCI is the work that we do in Bethesda, it's the grants that we support all around the country and all around the world, and it's a lot of infrastructure pieces as well to help us monitor some of these trends. So when we see a trend that's emerging, we have the opportunity to put out requests for grants to look at them. Sometimes that happens very naturally. So the rise in cancers among young adults is a great example. That has gotten a lot of press recently. It's been happening over more than a decade, but it took a while for it to really reach consciousness that it wasn't just someone that people knew, well, some one-off. This is a real shift in demographics. So we already have researchers that we fund that are exploring how we best manage these patients. Are their cancers different? In some cases, they are different from those emerging in older adults. Sometimes they appear to be the same for all intents and purposes, but do we treat them the same? It gets to the issue of survivorship. I've actually had people tell me that the mortality for these cancers hasn't changed, so almost like that, then it's not a problem. Mm-hmm. But it is a problem, and it's a problem because if you get cancer when you're 30 or 40 years old, and great, we cure that cancer, you're going to live for 40, 50 more years. And we need to be able to think about what that survivorship period means, and what do you need to know in terms of your future risk? What do you need to know about your fertility? What do you need to know about your your health in other ways? So it changes the kinds of questions that we ask when we see some of these different trends. But there are, we also learn a lot. So the lung cancer in younger Asian women, I remember when that first paper came out and we were stunned, but we also learned, once you can identify a grouping or a subset, you can focus. Mm-hmm. And once you can bring that focus in, you can get to therapies and you can get to ways that you treat with some confidence. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take just a divergence from this as well to go back to data. This is where we can use data to help us, especially AI, to really find those patterns, to see things that are emerging, and to be able to see where there are subgroups where there's an opportunity to really take a hook. We have 2 studies that were just published in the last couple of months, really using AI tools to predict how patients are going to respond to different therapies, one for chemotherapy, one for immunotherapy. With tools like that, then even as cancer's evolving, we can more rapidly keep up and be able to offer the therapy that's most likely to be effective.
Fantastic. Dr. Rathmel, this has been such a fascinating conversation. If this is going to be an era defined by speed, I'm sure everyone here is super excited about that. And if I may quote a Taylor Swift song, I think her song "Long Live" might be a good theme for this era. Thank you so much for being here.
That was the perfect way to end.
And now for a reading from Bless the Blood, a Cancer Memoir. Please welcome author Walela Nahanda.
Hello. How's everyone doing? Are we good? We're good? Nice. Okay. So I wrote a book, a memoir about going through cancer, and today when we talk about cancer and we talk about survivorship, things can be extremely heavy, extremely hard, and so I want to make you all aware that this book is a heavy book that we're going to go on an emotional ride, basically, is what I'm going to tell you all. So if you need to cry, Feel free to do it. I do it all the time. I'm a Pisces, so we can all do that. If you want to laugh, that's, people have different reactions. It's totally cool. But what I'm saying is take care of yourself through this reading. Also, with poetry, I know this might feel, we're all professional, but if you hear something you like, you can snap. So let's try that snap. Okay, great. Now we could say ooh. We can do that better than that. There we go, thank you. I like it, I like attention, so we're gonna do it like that, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna lean into it. Hopscotch for leukemia was apparently for a real disease. You have a white blood cell count of 660,000, that is 600% more than normal. You likely have leukemia, you will be getting admitted to the oncology unit, flatlines the room. The doctor darts out as quickly as he says the news. He leaves a nurse trying to hold back her pity, but failing miserably. My eyebrows twist into a question mark devoid of panic. I don't know what leukemia is. I haven't even heard of it, except this one time at Montessori. In elementary school, we were competing in a fundraiser for some poor sick kids pictured in colorless pamphlets. 8 hours passed to the metronome of hopscotching across my school's pastel chalk concrete playground. I was lighthearted back then, not whatever this is now. My face slammed against the garage door of my mind. A Google search illuminates me. Leukemia is blood cancer. Cancer, are you bleeping kidding me, cancer? Which is most of our reactions to that anyways. My mother asks, what do you want to have happen if you die? And we sign the advance directive. This is not my body's first time trying to kill itself. I remember back when hope first manifested as a jagged piece of glass in an alley off Vermont and Jefferson 2 years ago, when I thought my blood was a cancer. I was a liar to those I loved and tried to drain myself empty because the shame is unsurvivable and suicide felt like an answer for everyone to be without the stress of my craziness. Now, the past holds the present captive, and now my blood really is a cancer, except this time, I don't want to die, at least I don't think. All these years of people telling me, if you believe something for long enough, it'll come true. So of course, irony mocks me when the cancer diagnosis makes an anvil of itself. I tell irony to shut the entire hell up even though I beckoned this arrival. Wished for death so many times that of course, when I forgot his name, he sent the vultures for my carcass in the hospital. My mother asks me where I want to be buried, if it will be above my grandmother at the Inglewood Park Cemetery. Irony inserts herself again, cackles at a mother asking her own child about their funeral. Faith sits still in the corner holding hands with doubt, and I question, maybe if I never lied about being sick when I was younger, or tried to manipulate love out of people like squeezing a dried orange rind, maybe this wouldn't have happened. This is the what goes around comes around part, and I do deserve it. But reason tells me it's so much deeper than that. And fate nods his head in agreement, and God is puffing on a cigar in the corner of my hospital room with his feet kicked up in the easy chair, asking how bad do I want to stay or leave here? Remorse makes me believe I don't know the answer. Guilt asks that I talk to Lucifer instead. I say I don't want to die. And my grandmother's voice reminds me how melancholic I've always been, even as a child. That home is a place where sadness don't exist, and all the gospel songs I've spent my whole life listening to speak of a heaven we spend life marching toward. I say, this all don't sound so bad, that either way this goes, it is a survival of some kind, that I did survive myself no matter what, so I don't clutch onto hope's hand so heavy, whisper, thy will be done, and Nina swings from a chandelier singing freedom is living without fear, baby, and irony laughs again, except this time I join in. For a moment, the hospital bed is just a bed. My tubes, jewelry, this makeshift gown, a ballroom gown with a chiffon train. I dance with my granddaddy, who passes me to Ivy, my fiance, and I dance with Ivy, who returns me to myself, and I waltz in circles alone in a hospital room, on the border between heaven and earth. Thank you.
Here to discuss harnessing diversity and community in clinical trials, please welcome Brittany Miller, Project Director of Bronx Oncology Living Daily Program at Montefiore Einstein Comprehensive Cancer Center, Richard Barakat, Physician-in-Chief and Director of Cancer Care at Northwell Health's Cancer Institute, and Elena Rios, President of the National Hispanic Health Foundation. Back to lead the conversation, Yasmin Tayag.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Dr. Rios, Dr. Barakat, Dr. Miller, thank you so much for joining us. We've got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to jump right in. I'd like to start with the issue at hand, a lack of diversity. Why is there such a lack of diversity in our data, in our clinical trials, in our research? And what does that mean for the communities that you're serving? Dr. Miller, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So having diversity in clinical trials is incredibly important because the interventions and the medicine that comes from these trials, we need to make sure that they work for everyone, that the diversity and immunological responses are represented in all of the trials leading up to a drug or an intervention, being released into market. And so if we don't have that diversity, we're not seeing how these things are working in different groups of people, as well as kind of seeing what some of the barriers or obstacles to their efficacy looks like in these different groups of people, then we don't know until this is on the market that now, it's not accessible or it's not sort of as effective as we had hoped for it to be. And also, people do care about seeing themselves represented in the work that leads up to the production of anything. That's also how we feel more comfortable with actually utilizing it and opting into it once it is a suggested treatment or intervention. So that's super important, but we have challenges with including diversity in these trials. Definitely medical mistrust is something that comes up a lot. Also, lack of sort of providers recommending and encouraging patients to participate in these trials is one of the big barriers that we see nationwide. So also just making sure that patients are engaged in conversation by their providers, by their medical institutions, by peer navigators that they work with at the medical institution so that they have the information they need.
Dr. Barakat, what have you seen in your experience, why we're lacking in diversity?
Well, this is an extremely important question. Cancer clinical trials are the standard of care. In my opinion, every single cancer patient should be offered a clinical trial. It's been proven that clinical trials offer the best outcomes. They're often the most novel therapies, the most exciting therapies. The problem is that it's the haves and the immune checkpoint inhibitor or immunotherapy. But what does that mean if you're an 85-year-old black woman who doesn't own a car? What does it mean if you're a single mom with 3 children who doesn't have childcare? What does it mean if you're a veteran who's a double amputee because of a war injury and can't travel? The issue is that there is a select population that knows how, as I say sometimes, to get to the front of the line. And what we have to do is make sure that that access is available to all patients. I have the privilege of working for a healthcare system that takes care of more New Yorkers with cancer than anyone. Northwell has 20,000 new cancers a year, and we provide that care in 9 cancer centers. We opened a cancer center this year in Staten Island. Staten Island has the highest incidence of cancer in New York City, but you have to go over a bridge, or at least people thought they had to go over a bridge to get the best cancer care. And finally, we opened a brand new center in Queens. Think about it. Queens, 2.5 million people, the most ethnically diverse population in the world, with 130 spoken languages, never had a cancer center. We opened one this year. Our staff Our doctors, our nurses, our secretaries speak 32 different languages. And if you want to go on a cancer clinical trial and you don't speak English, it is very hard to understand that trial. And that's the problem with our clinical trials, is that...
What is your experience in seeing this lack of diversity?
Well, I'm here representing two different groups. The EQBMED is the Equitable Breakthroughs Through Medical Development, started by PhRMA. It includes the steering committee. What this group is doing is actually in not only connecting with the institutions, but with the practices in the community and with community health worker model to work on getting more patients that aren't involved in clinical trials to get involved in clinical trials. And I also represent an organization, the National Hispanic Health Foundation, which was, I actually started it 30 years ago with our National Hispanic Medical Association. And there are African American, Hispanic, Native American groups in the Southeast that are national or regional, all being participating to find the researchers in those communities, as well as outreach to build trust among the community organizations to find more patients for these centers. And I think what we're finding is that people are interested in knowing how to help. And because they want to know knowledge that they can pass on to their families, to their children, to their grandchildren. And I think that, especially for the Latino community, our families are very, very important. And when you have health campaigns and increasing knowledge about clinical trials, you have to reach not only the patient, it might be a woman, for example, but her husband, her adult children or younger children, and the whole family has to get involved with helping to make decisions on participation in these very important clinical trials that people don't really know about. And our doctors in our communities, especially our minority doctors, are so busy that they don't have that knowledge, and we need to be able to get more minority doctors involved in clinical trials too.
Absolutely. You know, the three of you have touched on themes that I want to get to in our conversation. You've mentioned engaging with the community and reducing barriers to access, and Dr. Miller, you spoke about historical mistrust. You know, I want to talk about that first. Historical mistrust is such a big issue in many communities of color. How do we even begin to approach that? Like, what works?
Yeah, so medical mistrust is undoubtedly a major obstacle. But it's not an insurmountable one. When I think about medical mistrust, I see it coexist, especially with our patient population, which is very diverse. The Bronx is about 55% Hispanic, 30% Black. We see that represented at Montefiore Einstein Comprehensive Cancer Center as well. And what coexists alongside of that mistrust and that hesitancy and some of that skepticism is also a curiosity and request for information and openness to have the discussions. So it's not that there's just this lack of trust and that's sort of a hard stop. There's also an opportunity to sort of cultivate that interest in learning more and having the conversations with providers, which many patients say they're providers don't really bring it up, so they don't even know what they are eligible for or even what's happening. So there's opportunity there, as Dr. Rios had mentioned, for doctors to be more involved in those conversations, definitely other key players in the medical institution to facilitate those conversations. And a lot of members of underrepresented minority groups come from collectivist cultures, so I've also seen patients express sentiments about having the opportunity to do something that benefits their community and improves the well-being of their community as a whole. And so that's also something to consider, that there are these aspects of motivation to participate. So I think one of the bigger challenges behind medical mistrust is actually how do we facilitate dissemination of important information, be able to sustain these ongoing efforts to have all of the conversations that are needed, because it's not just a one and done conversation. And then also, how do do we provide them with the ongoing support to give that individualized attention to overcome, those barriers, those other obstacles that come up alongside medical mistrust. So definitely think it's a multi-pronged approach. It requires all players from the institution to be invested in that effort, and something that you just have to focus on sustaining over time. But it's definitely something we can address.
Absolutely. And, you talked a lot about the importance of community in a lot of these populations. What are some ways in which that community can be engaged to, sustain discussion and awareness about, cancer research ongoing in those neighborhoods after the researchers leave? How do we do that? Dr. Barakat, maybe we'll start with you.
Education, education, education. You can't talk about a novel checkpoint inhibitor or immunotherapy. You have to start with the basics. What is pancreatic cancer? You have to look at the incidence of different cancers in the zip codes that you're targeting. You have to work with your community members. We have a community advisory board. George Ciberon, head of the Hempstead Hispanic Coalition, Reverend Phil Craig, pastor of the largest congregation in Jamaica, Queens, Father Malcolm from Harlem. We have Rabbi on our community advisory board. And you have to do community events. We do over 50 community events a year. We go into the communities. We have cancer ambassadors, employees of our healthcare system that staff these community events. And you start with education. And we partner with organizations like Walgreens, where we do events highlighting the importance of screening for lung cancer, highlight the importance of screening for colon cancer. So these are really grassroots efforts, but it's not enough. If you're talking to a patient in the office for the first time about a novel clinical trial and they don't speak your language, it is difficult enough for someone who speaks the same language to understand the complexity of a clinical trial. So I think you start with the basics, and I think for us, we can't stress enough the need to have those events in the communities, to partner with community organizations so that people feel engaged and that they're learning and they're talking to their relatives about it. And we do it in a culturally sensitive way, and we do it using people who speak different languages, because that's important.
That's so critical. Dr. Rios, can you talk to us about, with the community that you serve, the Hispanic community, what are some examples of community engagement, specific community engagement that you see working? What sorts of leaders are you collaborating with?
I think the importance of the Latino community can't be understated. In this country, 1 out of 4 Americans are Hispanic, and we will get to 1 out of 3 Americans by the year 2060. I mean, it'll be after my lifetime. But one of the things that's important is leadership development in our communities. Whether they're clinic directors or community-based organization directors, school districts, churches, I think leadership in our community is so important, and that you need to identify leaders to work with in your institutions that are doing clinical trials. The other thing I would say that's important, and I appreciate everything that's already been said about the importance of cultural relevance and language, but it's also what's important is the actual people within the healthcare system. And I'm not talking just doctors and nurses, but we really do need more community health workers. We need volunteers, navigators. We need student interns. Students in high school and college that are bilingual, for example, should be part of our hospitals and clinics to be able to have more people like the community see themselves in the healthcare world. And I think the clinical trial system has not been open to our communities, again, because the doctors that are Latino within the health systems are very, very few in number, and they get the most Hispanic patients. They're like a magnet attracting Hispanic patients. And I think we need to do a better job of educating the few minority doctors to get involved in community trials or clinical trials. with the National Hispanic Health Foundation, we have a webinar series, and we also have a mentoring program that we're developing. We've had a scholarship program for 20 years, finding students interested in becoming doctors, nurses, dentists, PAs, pharmacists, and I think it takes interdisciplinary training of those few minority doctors and pharmacists, et cetera, to come together in our communities as leaders, because they're the touch points for people that are interested in health.
Right, right. And, you know, I want to talk about the ways that clinical trials have to be, how we have to approach them in a different way. You know, clinical trials tend to happen in isolation. You have to go a long way to join these. What are some of the socioeconomic barriers that you're seeing people in your community face when it comes to taking part in these clinical trials, and what works to help them get past it? Dr. Miller, can we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. So definitely with a cancer diagnosis, there's just a huge financial burden. There are often a lot of out-of-pocket expenses that come with just managing a cancer diagnosis alone. So then thinking about a clinical trial and adding on cost of transportation, cost of childcare because there are more frequent visits to the clinic, time off of work that some people cannot afford. Many people in our population in the Bronx cannot afford to just take that time off of work or don't have that option. And then as well as the costs associated with participating in the trial. So there are some of those immediate costs that are directly tied to the trial, as well as sort of those sort of trickle down costs that come from the change in how they are living day to day and how they have to manage whatever responsibilities come with now being a part of this trial. So one thing that's really, really important and is helpful is the medical institution's knowledge and ability to secure financial assistance programs. There are many that are available. There are many that can be secured. And so it's really important to, one, be very upfront about the costs that are associated with participating in a trial, being able to have the discussion in depth with patients about this is what you can anticipate now and down the road in terms of costs associated with this. Also, the ability to pair patients. I say this all the time, but peer navigators are so important to have those one-on-one discussions as they come up, as more barriers pop up throughout time. As peer navigators also play a huge role, or patient navigators also play a huge role in helping patients articulate the issues they're having and empower them to express when they have concerns or they are facing obstacles, and helping to facilitate the conversations that need to be had with doctors or with other or their social worker or medical professional to discuss how to overcome that so that that retention stays. But definitely financial assistance programs are a huge help, and any sort of programs around providing transportation is also a huge help. But I think it's just, you know, on us to be aware of the burden that it does place on a patient, even though this is for their benefit, for the benefit of community, for the benefit of science, but understanding there's definitely a level of sacrifice there as well to participating and doing what we can to partner with them to overcome that.
Sure. And then Dr. Barakat, what's the role of healthcare institutions, healthcare systems and research institutions in helping address some of these factors?
Yeah, no, well, it's extremely important. We conduct approximately 250,000 screenings a year for social determinants of health to evaluate all of these issues, whether it's financial toxicity, food insecurity, et cetera. And one of the things that's been extremely important for us, and we put so much into the community, there's no patient that we don't treat. Finance is never a barrier. If a patient needs treatment, they're going to get treatment, whether it's getting them, as I mentioned, we have 45% minorities in our population, and 40% of them have government insurance, but we can get emergency Medicaid or provide free care. The other thing that we've done, and this is, I think, especially important for minority patients, is navigation. Navigation is important for every cancer patient. When you're given a diagnosis of cancer, your mind kind of goes blank. Everybody's giving you input. Everybody knows who the best doctor is, where the best place to go is. We now are navigating over 9,000 patients. We have multilingual navigators that handle everything for the patients, all the appointments, all the scans, and navigate them to clinical trials, and navigate them for the non-oncologic aspects of their care. Cancer doesn't exist in a vacuum. Patients have diabetes, heart disease, lung disease. So we try to put our arms around the patient and make sure that they're navigated to every aspect of their care, including the financial aspects of their care, because that isn't a reason why somebody doesn't get treated.
Absolutely. Dr. Rios, I have one last follow-up question for you, and then we'll close out our conversation. But before I do that, I'd like to invite the audience to start thinking about some questions, because we're going to open this up to a Q&A in a couple of minutes. So Dr. Rios, I want to close out our conversation with you, on this topic of navigation. In your experience with people in your community, what is the most important thing to help people? What are they really looking for?
I think one of the most important things is to have cancer survivors be part of this navigation team, and especially those who are from the same institutions, the same systems, who can impart a trust, but also open the eyes of the patient to feel more comfortable, and to be able to I think be an ambassador for the institutions or for the clinical trial places that you go to, whether it's the laboratory or getting your infusions or going to see the doctor or the labs. And I think that's part of what we don't see. We see people that are trained to be a navigator, but they may not have the real experience, the lived experience that's really needed to share and to feel to make people feel more comfortable.
Right. And ultimately, it's all about building that trust.
Right, and seeing people that are from the community, people that have lived the experience, or people that have had to deal with talking to their family about having cancer, and what are decisions that you make when you have cancer, especially thinking about the future. Nobody ever wants to think about death and dying or the future of your family and how do you deal with all those things. It's one thing to think about the here and now and feeling good or bad about a reaction to a medication. But it's really important to think about the future, and we don't think about the future. And death is just a transition, and life is a transition. But having cancer makes all of that come closer, and you want to know and talk to somebody that has gone through at least the experience of having to deal with it, and deal with these transitions of life.
Yeah, and I would expect also offer some hope.
Yeah, offer hope, and especially now with the treatments, and I mean, the institutions that you all come from, and it's so amazing. Medicine is just so amazing, and I think we all are appreciative of clinical trials because we get more information for future medications to help our cancer patients.
Absolutely. I'm going to open the floor up to questions, so please raise your hand, and we have people coming around with mics. Why don't we start right here?
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us all today. My name is Rebecca. I'm a clinical psychology doctoral student with aspirations of specializing in psycho-oncology. I'm beginning an externship soon. My question is what are what is it looking like for the future of family members and caregivers for patients, specifically for these populations? I have had experience working on a research study specifically for late navigators for both patients and family members, because as we are aware with family members and caregivers of patients, there are a whole set of unique challenges, and this can come in the form of patients with non-heteronormative relationships whose spouses are not respected by the system, or patients whose children have to act as translators and interpreters. And even the family members and caregivers kind of experience a individualized approach. There's less communication with the medical team, there's fewer community opportunities, and also, of course, there are patients who choose not to tell their family members that they're experiencing a cancer diagnosis, and also family members and caregivers who this is their first time ever having to take this position in their lives. So.
Sure. So the question is, what's the future look like for families of survivors?
I'll just say the caregiving experience has really risen to the attention of policymakers in Washington, D.C. I live in Washington, D.C. Our organization does a lot of advocacy, and I can say that there are clinical trial bills being developed with caregiving as a part of it. And I think that caregivers need to get paid and also to be valued in our society. Not just be a family member, but I think that it's a real burden to our cancer patients on having people that can provide care that's continuous, not just in and out people, and the families are usually the ones that end up having the burden of being the caregivers. And it's not going to change for a while, but I think that we talked about financial programs that need to happen, and the institutions need to think about providing support for caregivers too, and caregiver support groups, et cetera.
Also, sorry, really quick, if I could also add. So I work for a program within Montefiore Einstein Comprehensive Cancer Center called BOLD, and it is a psychosocial cancer wellness program that provides support for cancer patients and their family members living in the Bronx. So the caregiving is definitely something that we think about as well, as we're sort of coming from a holistic wellness lens. So we do quality of life assessments with caregivers to I think the first step is understanding. As you mentioned, there's a range of challenges that caregivers experience themselves. So the first step is just understanding what those are and knowing that while there are some similarities, it's also very individualized challenges. So we do those quality of life assessments with caregivers of all of the cancer patients that come through our program. And then we also have caregiver support groups and provide one-on-one caregiving counseling. We also have a support program just for youth dependents called Bold Brother Sisters that just focuses on making sure that the younger folks in the lives of cancer patients and survivors are also receiving the support they need. And we see in the Bronx a lot of the children are involved in the caregiving, and so having that extra support, making sure they're staying up with their goals and academics, and also have opportunity to be in community with others that are sort of processing and managing sort of a similar experience, super important. So yeah, definitely thank you for raising that, because that is also something that needs a lot of attention as well.
Thank you so much for your question. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more, but I wanted to thank Dr. Miller, Dr. Barakat, Dr. Rios for such a great conversation. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome back to the stage, Walela Nahanda.
Hello. A lot of what I based this reading around was based off of the workshops or the seminars that I was seeing. And so it wouldn't be right for me to be in New York and not do this poem, because it is about Dr. Mutulu Shakur, who is a community health advocate, part of the Black Panther Party, who recently passed away, but someone who I look to very deeply. And then also not mentioning Illness as Metaphor by Susan Sontag, and the way in which being Black and with cancer, it often feels like we are enemies of the state, quite literally. The way that we talk about cancer, the way that we look at Black people is often from a very violent and militaristic perspective. And so this is in dedication to him. Enemy of the state. Black people are not people. We are unseen ideas. Cancer is not for the human. It too is an idea. Cancer did not benefit from its cousin tuberculosis, with diagnosis being an ascension to enlightenment. No, the symptoms were never made into an inspiration. Cancer went from illness to metaphor for the very worst things. Writers, too lazy to make any other parallels about invisible forces of evil, round up cancer as tribute. Society writes diatribes, weaponizing cancer to awaken the imagination. Political orientation does not matter. Cancer was and still is the all-encompassing vehicle for whatever is wicked, immoral, or corrupt. Cancer, an unexplainable, mean-spirited phenomenon, ravishes anyone who will host it. To host it is to host an enemy of the state, an enemy to the people, a barrier to freedom. Cancer is a trained sniper to not only its hosts, but to everyone surrounding the host. Cancer is us versus it. As a patient, cancer is you versus it, but also the world versus it. The war on cancer is fine and well, but it, the cancer, lives inside you. By default, you are now an opposing force to the good of humanity. A therapist at my cancer support center asks me to draw what my leukemia looks like, and Black Crayola forges a web of tentacles riddle. If a Black person is an idea, and cancer is an idea, then will the illness ever be real? Will the person ever have existed? If you have so many ideas, and hardly any grounded in reality, do the ideas have their stories too? Thinking, to be Black is to be a non-thing, a nothing, not human, barely animal. They will accuse you of letting an angel draw its long fingernail against your neck to drain you of your mortality and morality. Bad ideas like Black people and cancer are not meant to coexist, must be cut out, taken into the woods, put down, removed as a smudge on the windows of humanity, or experimented on as an idea that gives way to an idea, that gives way to an idea, that gives way to an idea. Answer. The Black cancer patient is a mythical fascination, a playground for the author and reader's perception. I am only as real and tangible as your will allows me to be. And this one is called Bless the Blood, which is what my book is called. Bless the blood, a poison turned wine. Over a year with cancer, and sometimes I think I am the elixir of luck, the highly favored that my God speaks of. On the worst days, I remember I am still breathing. Call on my ancestors at the altar with a series of gifts laid out from when I was discharged from the hospital: dried carnations, an abalone shell, candles, a raven's feather, a Hawkeye stone my friend CJ gave to me. I think of my granddaddy, the one my relatives say I am just as brooding as, with a biting sarcasm and a wit that can be charming enough to turn on a jukebox of comfortability in any room. I think of my grandma, a daughter of East Texas. She, the sweetest woman I have ever known, but she still never took no sass. On my best days, I try to be like her. There are so many more names I call on at the altar, filled with spirits who sacrifice their bodies, and this body is at war with itself, but damn, don't I know I wouldn't have survived if the ones before me didn't try to either. My people, we know nothing of olive branches and peace treaties. I am lined in hellfire with the inheritance to take back what is mine, so bless the blood, the Holy Communion, the most divine, for there is more than my own blood running inside me, the bearer of good fruit from the poplar tree. God, don't give us nothing we can't handle, my grandma would say. This cancer is not tempered alone, so I hold my lover's hand and I pray a little harder. I write these poems to remind y'all I was here, and this thing, it was trying to take all of me. Sweetness, I am the child of flowers, blooming, with a body holding me, but a soul that is carrying me. I am both ghostly and living, the youngest and oldest ancestors, so bless the blood. Bless these droopy, fatigued eyes and stiff muscles. Bless the sapphire bruises and night sweats shivering. Bless the ivy track marks and these shrunken veins. Bless this big old restless heart. Bless the dreams my body can no longer afford the rent to. Bless this in-between brief bliss. Bless the love I am trying to make room for. Bless the cancer, God. Bless leukemia. I am still trying so hard to understand. Thank you.
And now for a conversation on Improving the Odds, a clinical trial saved my life. Please welcome Kelly Spill-Bonito and Imtiaz Balti, cancer survivors and clinical trial participants. Andrea Sursek, gastrointestinal oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. With Daniel Engber, senior editor at The Atlantic.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Sursek, Imtiaz, Kelly, thank you for being here. I am delighted to be talking to you. And I'm going to jump right in, but we're going to have a few minutes at the end for questions. So if something is on your mind, hold on to it, and hopefully we'll have a chance to answer it later. Dr. Sursek, I would love to hear just about how this clinical trial got started. My understanding is the immunotherapy that you were looking at had shown limited effects in people with advanced colorectal cancer. Tell me how you went from that to deciding to run the study.
Sure. So the idea behind the study was really two parts. One was that we focused on rectal cancer, which is the part of the large intestine that's all the way down in the pelvis. So normally for rectal cancer, we treat it with chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, just because it's really hard to get to, and so patients need all three modalities typically. And especially radiation and surgery can be quite toxic in survivorship. So people do well, they survive, but about 30% need a permanent bag or a permanent colostomy, just because the tumors are so low that the bowel can't be reattached. And radiation has toxicity that affects like bowel function, bladder function, sexual function, and also causes infertility and early menopause because the ovaries and the uterus are in the field of radiation. So people survive, but there's a lot of toxicity and a lot of morbidity that's associated with it, which really changes quality of life completely. So immunotherapy, at the time when we were thinking about this study, was shown to work in advanced disease in these tumors that were called mismatch repair deficient. So they had this genetic mutation where the immune system actually recognized the tumor. And so when we were treating patients with this type of mutation in their tumor with advanced disease, we did see pretty amazing responses, but we hadn't really tested it in early stage. So the thinking was, could we take this patient population that had mismatch repair deficient early stage rectal cancer and use immunotherapy as a first maneuver? And basically we designed the study to see how much could we get away with. It was sequential because obviously we wanted to cure the patient. So we didn't want to take away any part of their standard of care. That's super important in clinical trials, especially in the curative setting. If we know we can cure, we can't take that away. So the design of the study was such that we said, okay, let's start with immunotherapy first, give that for 6 months and see what happens. If the tumor's gone, maybe we don't need to do any other part of standard of care. If the tumor's not gone, okay, then we can jump right on to standard of care and still cure the patient, but maybe minimize radiation, maybe not surgery, or maybe not do chemotherapy if we could get away with it. Or if immunotherapy alone worked, then maybe we didn't need anything else at all.
So can you tell us what happened when you started with the 6 months of just the immunotherapy?
So absolutely the most exciting thing imaginable happened, and all the patients had a complete response to immunotherapy alone. So no one needed radiation, no one needed surgery or chemo to date, actually, which is pretty amazing.
So you mentioned this is just a subset of patients with rectal cancer with a certain gene profile. Is there any possibility that this therapy would work for other people, or I mean, how does it generalize to other kinds of cancer too? And if not, why not?
Yeah, that's a super important question, and I think our goal is that absolutely we'll be able to translate this to all types of cancers, not just the patients that have this mutation in their tumor, which is like about 5% of all solid tumors. So the problem is that most of the time the immune system just doesn't recognize the tumor. The beauty here is that when you give immunotherapy, it takes the brakes off of the natural immune system. So when the immune system is already interested in fighting the cancer, amazing things like this can happen. But normally in the other 95% of our patients, the cancer is kind of hidden from the immune system. So there's a ton of research now trying to use the same approach in early stage disease and also in advanced disease to see how could we get the immune system interested and then give immunotherapy to hopefully replicate these responses.
Okay, and last just basic question about how this works. Cancer immunotherapy includes lots of different things, even from vaccines to all different kinds of checkpoint inhibitors. The one that you chose, why did you choose that? And would you expect that maybe other cancer immunotherapies might work very well for the same population of patients?
Yeah, so I would. So we chose a single drug, which is called the PD-1 inhibitor. That's the mechanism of action. And there's actually several drugs in that category that are now approved for this indication based on the results of the study, PD-1 inhibitors. Sometimes you can give combination therapy. We didn't want to give combination because we didn't think we needed that strong of a treatment, and of course with more treatment there's always more side effects, so that's always an important thing to consider in all treatment, but especially in clinical trials. But I do think that there are a number of ways that this would work. It's really, the key is really just engaging the immune system, or sort of allowing the immune system to kind of do what it wants to do and cut those checks and balances that the tumor and the body naturally have.
Kelly and Imtiaz, you two are both early participants in this amazing trial. I'd love to hear about how and why you initially chose to participate in the study.
So yeah, basically, when I figured it out, I have colon cancer. So when I went to see my oncologist, so they were already there, ran down what traditional treatment would look like, and what immunotherapy would do. So it reaffirmed me, like, okay, it has like more potential and outcome. So that's why we actually chose to go with immunotherapy. I was like, I did not know what's going on. I was just like so naive in that sense, because I have never dealt with any cancer before, and I've never seen my family, anybody getting into cancer. But my doctor said that, okay, this is the trial they're doing, and promising outcomes, so I would recommend that one. So I said, okay, why not? Let's try that.
Kelly, could you just sort of walk us through your thought process as the trial was getting started?
As the trial was getting started. Yes, so in the beginning, my trial being started, I, just like Imtiaz, did not know what I was getting myself into. I didn't really know what a clinical trial was, but I knew that it was better, or it sounded better than chemotherapy, so that is why I took that route. The first treatment went well. The second treatment, I started already to feel better, and questioned, why am I feeling great on treatment 2? Is this good? Is this bad? Do I feel better? I immediately called Sloan. I called my research nurse. They are like family when you are working with them. She immediately answered and said, this is a great sign. Just keep doing what you're doing. I was patient 4, so I actually had no idea what could have happened during this treatment plan. By treatment 4, my tumor was halfway gone, and by treatment 9, my tumor had completely disappeared.
So as Dr. Sursik mentioned, there's a standard of care here that's associated with a lot of complications, but also pretty good success rate. So how did you balance? It seems like a tricky thing to imagine, well, there's one path here, which is the conventional path that has all these downsides, but is, it works pretty well, and then taking a flyer on participating in a trial. Was that a difficult decision to weigh those two things?
For me, at 28 years old, hearing that if I went the chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery route, I would have been left with a colostomy bag the rest of my life, and I would have never been able to carry another baby again. At the time, I had an 8-month-old at home, and hearing that completely broke me. So the fact that this clinical trial could not just save my quality of life, but also give my family and I another life, it felt like a no-brainer at that point.
Wow. Imtiaz, you were talking backstage a little bit about your first appointment and even just understanding where you were at Memorial Sloan Kettering, being a leading cancer hospital in the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so basically, when I got diagnosed, it was a COVID time, so, restriction, nobody can go in. So I went to see, first appointment with my surgeon back in Virginia. I went to see my surgeon, and he's like, okay, he was from Pakistan. Usually in Pakistan, when doctor give you news, they butter it, and they, he said, like, I'm not going to do any of those. Your colon is like 75% blocked. So, and there's a chance that we have to take your colon out and you have to wear a stopper for the rest of your life. Be honest, like when I heard that I'm 27 years old, I was like just blacked out. I did not know what doctor is saying. So I was like, can you please bring one of my friend outside so you can tell them what's going on? After that, I met my oncologist. He was ready with like all the traditional way to do it, when we're going to do surgery, when we're going to do like radiation and all that. And after that, he said, okay, there is another possibility, that's immunotherapy, and you can go for that. And it has, as I mentioned earlier, it has a better result. It's shown better results. I guess I was the 12th patient. And before, we have seen a really good result, so why don't you go for that? And I said, okay, why not? Let's do that. And so when I got to catering saloon, Dr. Sursik and her colleagues were ready for me, and they were ready, and they mentioned and they ran down what we're going to do. In that whole process of explaining to us how they're going to treat and the plan and everything, they never mentioned surgery once. And so one of my friends, Zishan, he was so curious, and I'm like, can I ask you a question? When he's going to go through surgery? And the doctor looked at us and said, we're hoping we're not going to have surgery. At that very moment, we were like, I saw both of my friends, and I'm still like emotional. We were like tears coming down. And it was just a relief, and at that very moment we realized that I made a very important decision in my life to going through this trial. I did not have kids back then, and now I have a child. She is 16 months old, sorry. And that's just a life-changing decision that I made that day. So right now, I'm standing here in front of you all.
So obviously, you're both quite young, and I think maybe not the profile that pops into people's minds when they think about people with colorectal cancer. Dr. Sursik, was age one of the criteria for inclusion in the study?
No, it wasn't actually. The age range is 26 to 78, so we kind of have a mix, but many of these patients do have Lynch syndrome, which is a genetic predisposition to making these types of mismetric or deficient tumors, and they tend to be younger, but it's about half of the patients. And then the other thing that's happening is we're actually seeing a rise in rectal cancer in young adults worldwide, so we're seeing more and more young patients with rectal tumors for unknown reasons.
Both of our guests here mentioned their age as a factor in thinking about whether to enroll in the clinical trial, and I wonder if that's something that you've come across with other participants that are younger people more likely to try enrolling in a trial than some of your older patients?
I think initially, yes, because of, the obvious potential toxicity on fertility and on sexual function, perhaps. But I think most people we find with rectal cancer, even aside from this trial, are very motivated to try to minimize radiation and surgery if at all possible because of the effects on quality of life.
So the trial's ongoing. My understanding is you're still active participants in it. Can you tell me, Kelly, what's the status of it now? I mean, you had this incredible response to the treatment. Where are we now, and what's the future look like as you understand it?
Yeah, I'm 3.5 years in of being a cancer survivor. Thank you. I still go in for scans. I actually just got pushed to yearly scans, which is super exciting. And every 6 months, I also go for a sigmoidoscopy, and we do biopsies. We do 3 for research, 1 for MSK. That is my biggest contribute that I can do for this research trial. It's never a good time. And I also like to speak on it with my social media as well. And, I know you do the same thing. And we were just talking backstage of how many people that we have talked to that's also out of our country. It's absolutely crazy how far social media platforms can really reach, and just word of mouth, so it's really big. But as for me right now, I am happy to say that I now have an almost 1-year-old at home. I also have my 5-year-old at home, and being on this clinical trial, it has really given me a second chance at life, and I live completely differently than I had prior to having cancer, and I know I live differently if I were to go through chemo. My life is just so incredible at this point, and I'm very grateful for Dr. Sursick, for MSK, for this clinical trial and stepping into the unknown. Sometimes it's very scary, but sometimes it works out great. So I'm just happy to be where I am, and I live life as it comes. We go with the flow a lot and just try not to take anything for granted.
Well, we certainly appreciate that you're both here talking about your experience, but it's also quite striking how you've done so much work to speak out and talk about this. I'm curious, what in this advocacy work that you're now doing, if it's fair for me to call it that, what are the key things you'd like to get across? Is it about participation in clinical trials? Is it about the promise of cancer immunotherapy? What are your goals in speaking out on social media or otherwise?
Yeah, I think I'm still trying to hone in on exactly where I'm trying to target. For me, being a young woman, being diagnosed with colorectal cancer, knowing it's on the rise for young adults, I'm very big on talking about the fertility part. Doing so, I have had others reach out to me, young women, just asking for direction on what to do, and just someone to vent to. So I think for me, a lot of it is women to women, young adults, fertility, and then just generally putting my story out there. You never know who is going to gravitate towards what part of your story. I know you have a long story, I have a long story. There's so many small details, and there's so many people out there that can just grab anything from that story. So.
For me, so basically, I was interviewed by an Australian magazine, social media magazine, and that story I posted on my TikTok, and it got viral. And still now, it's been 3 years, people reach out to me, how we're gonna enroll, what is the process, and who is the right person to contact. So I have Dr. Sursick and a research coordinator, Jenna, so I direct to them. And second thing is that what I do usually, try to encourage young kids and young people, if you see any of these symptoms, rush to a doctor and see everything's fine. Because I think that, in my case, I had those symptoms like 8 months prior to getting diagnosed. And so the doctor thought it's just small stomach ache and some medication, stop bleeding. But after 7 months, I realized that the case was a little bit worse than we could have prevented. So doing biopsies, doing colonoscopy, if you see any of those symptoms, and putting out my words on social media, TikTok, and trying to make awareness campaign so people can understand a little bit more and take those small symptoms seriously, and to prevent getting to that point.
So, Dr. Sursik, it's now, I think, 2 years this month since the first results from this trial were reported and published in the New England Journal of Medicine. What's the latest? Where are we today?
So we just presented actually at the same meeting a couple of weeks ago the update. So we've enrolled 48 patients in the rectal group, and 42 that were assessed. All 42 have had a complete clinical response, and we have not seen any regrowths of the tumor. So everyone has held on to their rectum and all of their function, which has been amazing. And we've actually expanded the study to other solid tumors like stomach cancer and pancreas cancer, prostate cancer, liver cancer that are mismatch repair deficient, with the same approach of 6 months of immunotherapy to see if we could, also offer non-operative management or spare patient surgery, because obviously removing pancreas changes quality of life, esophagus changes one's quality of life. So that trial is now ongoing, and we have just over 50 patients in that group as well.
And what does the path look like from a study like this with a 100% success rate and a new standard of care? What steps need to be overcome to get to that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting path, and so we, obviously the goal is to get FDA approval in the U.S. and then approval in the EU and worldwide, all of which have similar regulatory agencies. And so the way that works is you talk to the FDA, they review the data, and for us actually, a year and a half ago, the FDA said, okay, these data look very promising. They're early, single center. So they held what's called an ODAC, which is a meeting where they basically have a panel of experts that vote to say, what should be the design of the global confirmatory study, because that's what you need. You need a large study, multiple sites worldwide, really, to say, okay, to the FDA, this really works outside of MSK. And so the challenge for us is that this is again a curative setting where we know we can cure patients with treatment. So normally in these types of studies, the standard has been, okay, the new treatment that we're proposing, which would be this immunotherapy, versus the standard. So patients would get randomized. And our argument was, well, to me, it's completely unethical to sit in front of a young person and say, well, there's a 50% chance I'll give you this immunotherapy that I can tell you, close to 100% will work, or we might have to radiate and remove your rectum, et cetera, et cetera. And so this was the debate, and thankfully, actually, the ODAC voted in favor of a single-arm study in the curative setting of just immunotherapy, and then secondly, with the endpoint of a clinical complete response. So they didn't say, no, you have to take everybody to surgery and show us that the tumor's really gone, in a specimen. They allowed this approach of following patients and kind of being patient, making sure that the tumor is truly gone, for the sake of the patients, not just for data. So that's been exciting. The study now is called AZURE-1, and it's actively ongoing. It's accruing phenomenally well in Europe. In the US, actually, a year ago, the NCCN guidelines approved immunotherapy, which means that the provider can give it without a clinical trial, that insurance will cover it. And so we've had some trouble accruing, but patients still do have access to immunotherapy with rectal cancer that is mismatch repair deficient. So that's been really exciting.
Wow. We're going to have a few minutes for Q&A if there's anyone who has a question. I see some hands. I'm not sure how this works in terms of maybe. Okay, here we go. Microphone is approaching.
Hi, you mentioned that, and we've all heard about it in the news, that rectal cancer is increasing in young adults. Those things don't happen overnight. Is there any idea about when that might have started? And second part of my question is anybody studying why yet?
So yes, thank you for that question. That's a great question. So no, you're correct. It has not happened overnight. It's actually been rising, documented rising since the mid-1990s. And what's most interesting is that it's actually associated with the birth cohort of 1950 and later. So there's this clear uptick in people born after 1950, really suggesting that it's an environmental exposure. And it's rising more in left-sided tumors, like in rectal tumors, but it's not unique to rectal tumors. It's colorectal cancer, and actually it's even beyond that. Most of the GI tract cancers are rising. And what's even scarier, I think, is that it's occurring worldwide. So every country that has a registry, that's been able to keep a registry, is noting this steady rise of a few percentage points annually. And so we believe that it's an environmental exposure. There are now several groups studying it. We actually opened a center for young onset colorectal cancer at MSK in 2018. And half of it was dedicated to research, and the other half is to help young patients navigate the disease with all the support services that we can offer. And now there's many centers that have popped up actually throughout the United States that we helped open, as well as worldwide. So there's now a lot of interest in research to find out why this is happening, but then also in supporting the young patients through and their caregivers and their families through treatment.
Thank you both for being here, all three of you actually. I know you mentioned quality of life after immunotherapy was better, but as someone who did chemo and immunotherapy, I'm wondering, was your treatment at the time, what were the side effects like? And then also for Dr. Sursic, do you see immunotherapy becoming first-line treatment, not just for gastroenterology, but for all oncology in the future?
I personally did not feel any side effects.
For me, there was no side effects. But what happens, like when you go through a treatment, small changes in your body, you start noticing it. In a real life, we would not. We would not even notice that it's happening when you're going through a treatment. Sometimes I felt like I was itchy, but I'm itchy sometimes, so I think that is normal for me. So I did not have no side effects. So, yeah.
And then to answer your question, I hope so. I think, eventually we will find a way to be able to use immunotherapy as first-line treatment for all cancers. But I think it'll be, well, not too long. I'm an optimist. It won't be too long.
Okay, well, I think that's the time we have. Thank you again so much to all three of you.
Now for a conversation produced by our underwriter, PhRMA, on Precision Oncology, the Future of Cancer Care. Please welcome Daniel Ash, Vice President Oncology Franchise at Boehringer Ingelheim, and Lori Riley, Chief Operating Officer at PhRMA.
Welcome, Dan, to the stage. I want to start off by talking about, the eradication, hopefully one day, of cancer, which I think everyone in this room would love to see. As an industry today, we have about 1,600 medicines that are in clinical trials being developed. Not all of those will get across the finish line, obviously, but they do provide hope to the patients that are waiting for them. Boehringer has been a leader in the oncology space. I wondered if you could take a minute and talk a little bit about precision oncology and the work that Boehringer's doing in that space.
No, thank you, Lori. It's great to be here today. Precision medicine, the idea is actually pretty straightforward. It's about identifying the specific cancer treatment and being able to get it to the right time for the right patient. And so targeted therapies, this notion of precision medicine has really revolutionized care and made significant advance, but at the same time, there's still a big unmet need. And I think globally it's over 10 million people who die each year of cancer. And so clearly there's still a big problem. And so what's really important is to be able to identify and understand which patients are going to be able to respond to which type of specific medication. And this area of identifying specific patients, identification of biomarkers, understanding and digging deeper into the pathology, all of these things, there's tremendous opportunity. But for that to be able to happen, a lot more research is needed.
Great. Well, I know obviously getting a medicine approved is very challenging, right? We know it takes anywhere from 10 to 15 years at a cost in excess of $2 billion on average. And the failure rate is very high, often 90% or more, depending on the therapeutic area. So getting a medicine to market is challenge number one. But after that, the other challenge is really the public policy environment that a medicine, has been introduced into, and the incentives or sometimes disincentives that exist about getting a medicine to patient, about encouraging the types of incentives that are necessary to do the research and development. So, for example, 2 years or so ago, Congress passed a bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, which there was a piece of that bill that said that a pill, a small molecule medicine, would have 9 years on the market before the government would be allowed to come in and set the price. But if you were a biologic medicine, a medicine that's infused or injected into the body, it was 13 years. This has been often referred to as the pill penalty. The challenge with that, and I think about the oncology space where you're at, is that for many oncology medicines, they're not just approved for one indication. They may not just be approved for lung cancer, but later they may be studied in prostate cancer or kidney cancer, what have you. But a lot of that research happens 7 years or later after a medicine has been approved. But if you introduce a legislation that says, well, at 9 years your price may be set, it changes how companies have to think about prioritizing their research and investment dollars and prioritizing the timing of that. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about challenges like that and how they impact a company's thinking about research and development.
No, it's a really good point, Lori, and there's been so much talk and so much press about finding ways to make medicines accessible and affordable for patients, right? Because I think everyone agrees that patients deserve and need access to these life-saving treatments. So now I'm not a policy expert, far from it, but policies like you mentioned, the IRA, our organization, Boehringer, is definitely concerned about unintended consequences and the potential threats and risk to innovation that comes with it. And so, and you mentioned the example of small molecules versus large. And that's a great example that we're concerned about, and the potential disincentives and then the consequences that come with that. Now, at the same time, there's hurdles, but we also think about what's Boehringer doing in response to that. And so we have a strong network of partners. We can't go it alone, and I don't think any organization in our industry can. Can't go it alone, but we have a strong network of partners that together we're going to try and figure this out. We partner with patients, we partner with patient advocacy groups, researchers, academia. In our world of oncology, it's the community providers, there's network providers, aggregators, you name it. It's a very long list. And together, we'll have to work together to figure out and solve for this access issue, which patients need and deserve.
Absolutely. One of the things that's been talked about here today is the need to get medicines to patients quicker. We heard that in the very first panel from our NCI director, that the need for speed in getting medicines to patient quicker is really important. One of the policies that was put in place years ago to incentivize that was the accelerated approval pathway. In fact, about 70% of medicines that have had that designation are oncology medicines. But recently, that's been another area where there's been some pushback in terms of medicines that have gone through accelerated approval, whether that's from the government or from payers questioning a medicine like that. That's another challenge, if you will, that needs to be overcome. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of addressing a challenge like that?
Yeah, well, I think what's important, especially in a world like cancer care with oncology, it's tough.
Yeah.
it's complicated, and there's no one universal solution, and so it's really hard. But at Boehringer, our approach as an organization, our approach to cancer care is broad and it's diligent. And so what's important is how we tackle issues like that, and it's I guess it leads to something that's a little bit more personal. So what's important, if we talk about cancer care, each journey is very unique for each patient, right? And so many of the drivers for a lot of our scientists, our researchers, all of our employees, for that fact, unfortunately have had many direct experiences with cancer or known someone who has. And so that's oftentimes the motivator or the driver behind all that we do. And so for me in particular, it's especially personal. My father passed away from cancer about 16 years ago, and a rare type of lung cancer, way too young. Unfortunately, the year that he retired, never was able to meet my family, hadn't met my niece, my brother's family, and frankly, it's the small things. I miss the calls with him every day on my way to work. And so those things, I think it's remarkably personal, and taking cancer on is personal. I think with that, that's really a big driver, and that's how we're going to do great things.
That's great. Okay, so last question for you. If our goal as an industry or as a society is to maintain the incentives that encourage research and development, including into hard to treat, whether it's cancer medicines or other type of cancers, how do we ensure that lawmakers who do make the rules by which we live understand the ecosystem that research and development happens in and the value of innovation and the intellectual property that protects it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And what's really important is to have an ecosystem that fosters and develops and leads to innovation. That's particularly true in cancer care, right? And so with that, we have to stay the course. For Boehringer, we have a generational commitment. We're a family-owned company, and we have a generational commitment to the long-term focus and really transforming the lives of people who are living with cancer. Being an independent organization, we have a long-term focus, right? And what's really important is being patient-centric. I like to think of it, Lori's, two prongs, if you will. Patient centricity, patients are at the center of everything we do, but then also fostering that environment that enables long-term focus and innovation. With that, if you combine those two, that's what's going to make a difference in finding true solutions and not only treatments for cancer care, but ultimately cures for cancer care.
That's great. Well, thank you, Dan, so much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
For a reading from Bless the Blood, a Cancer Memoir, followed by an interview, please welcome back to the stage Walela Nahanda.
Hello. This will be my last reading. I will be done emotionally torturing you all after this, I promise. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for just taking the time today to be here in general and to center survivorship, especially just given I'm 3 years out of my stem cell transplant. It's just really beautiful to know that there's work being done around that. And so this poem is about my donor, who is a woman I have not met, but 3 years ago I had a different donor back out. For Black people, we have a 23% chance of finding a donor, so even finding one was difficult, but I did a transplant at the height of the pandemic, and it was alone for 31 days at City of Hope. City of Hope is a phenomenal institution, so yeah. My donor, a nameless, faceless, 35-year-old woman in Greece, agrees to give me her immune system. A stranger agrees to become a part of me without knowing me, and just me needing a transplant is enough. No begging or pleading with her directly on the internet. A sure thing is not what I am used to. So I tread suspiciously, lightly. I heard on Grey's Anatomy once, when you've experienced so much trauma, even the best things will feel just as doom-inspiring. My caseworker suggests I write a card anonymously. I write in cursive on cheap stationery about how I don't know if thank you is enough. I wanted to write, a part of me quietly wishes we are related. When tracing my ancestry, I saw some of my family lived in Athens, Texas, and I cocked my head to the left, wondering if my whole life was planned out, or if I'm using philosophy to make meaning out of coincidence. A woman who is my guardian angel agreed to give me another shot at bull riding this life. Maybe it's none of the above, and something simple, like a stranger's selflessness, keeps me alive. No epic coincidence, no parable, no greater meaning, just a woman saying yes emphatically to the idea of me. I'm gonna close out with this one. This one means a lot to me. Who likes Whitney Houston here? Anybody? Yeah, okay, amazing. We're in great contact. There's not enough hands up, but okay. I am the head of the Whitney Houston fan club. It is not an official institution. However, come visit me and talk about it later. So I think when it comes to surviving cancer, there are people and songs and things that we hold on to. Whitney Houston, her life has been one for me. And so when we talk about survivorship, it is oftentimes you get to a mountain and you're like, why am I here? Why did I do this? It's very different than what you expect. And so this is for Whitney. Kevin Costner stood behind a pulpit in his Sunday best at Whitney Houston's childhood church, mourning her death. He shared the story behind the bodyguard and how he knew instantly he wanted her involved, even though he was asked, "Do you realize she's black?" He noticed early on, despite all the talent she had, despite all the beauty, she was still insecure, still asked, "Am I good enough?" To which many would click their teeth thinking, how could one of the best singers in the world be this insecure? And sure, that's easy to think about as I bite my lip watching, but I personally was not trying to cry as he ended his speech with, "If you could tell Whitney one thing today, it would be, you weren't just good, you were great." The day my body decided to act like a plunging roller coaster with cancer, I was dizzy trying to sleep it off, and Whitney sang me to sleep with "My love is your love." Whitney was our play pretend auntie, especially after Cinderella with Brandy. Her voice would go from a saintly falsetto to belting, sustaining breath longer than I ever could. She had this dynamic personality and a vocal range, like her singing was the gateway to heaven itself, yet she was told by family, by lovers, by too many surrounding her and benefiting off her, she was not good enough. In fact, she was crazy. Then the public agreed. To have hardship and be black when you're supposed to be just a singer means to lead a life pretending no one has tainted it. Was ridiculed for having a toxic, then abusive relationship only because it distracted from the singing. I know I've said it before, but to be black is an idea no matter how much money or talent it makes us. It is to supersede expectations, to only be told, do it again but better. Her addiction made her bad stock. Loving a woman made her a heathen. The abuse made her a nobody, and support was never considered something she needed. Everything was always Whitney's fault in the media, never those around her. She took the hit each time. Now, I am no Whitney Houston, nor will I ever be or promise to be, but I do cry about her often lately. It seems no matter what we do, that is the thing that lingers. Was I good enough? Why wasn't I good enough? After listening to Kevin Costner's speech, I sobbed to her Grammy performance of One Moment in Time, snotty nose and all, because you can hear it, the eagerness to be something meaningful. I think we all can relate to Whitney. I collected the gigantic tears from my face in a bottle of wishes, thinking that is all I want to. One moment, and I can die in peace. Just one moment where everything is falling into place and I know I'm gonna be here, or see for certain that I left an impact, or a part of my heart has lived on in another. That is all I notice. I tend to search through for cancer, through cancer, before cancer, probably after cancer. If anyone could speak to me as a self-loathing child, if anyone could speak to me as a self-blaming adult, I would want them to say while I was alive to hear it, you aren't just good, Walela, you're great. I want to do the same in return. I don't want to be 13 picking rose petals off a bouquet, sitting on my grandma's coffin at her funeral, thinking of everything I wish I could have told her. I want to receive flowers while living. I want to give flowers while I still am able to. I don't want to rely on being good enough by some impossible standard. I want to be good by my own standard. In my own time, I want to be great, I want to be good, and I want to fail. Perhaps, if I'm wishing real hard, I want to be half the sunbeam Whitney was. I want to evoke that type of emotion with the sound of my voice that makes you jump into the human form of yourself and say, God damn, ain't it wild to be alive? Ain't it wild to have all these emotions and actually feel them? I want to know about love, like how Bell Hooks writes about it. I know love is far more vast than romance, so give it to me. I want to love people. I want people to experience my love. I want to understand love in all forms. I want to stop begging for love for the bare minimum. I want to stop being afraid of giving love. I want to give others a fraction of what her music and films gave to me. No, Whitney, you weren't just great. You were freaking brilliant. You are brilliant, and any good thing I do is for the kids singing along to My Love Is Your Love on a silver portable CD player in the back of my mom's car, looking out the window for love to find us both. Thank you so much.
Please welcome to the stage The Atlantic's Candace Montgomery.
I mean, amazing.
Thank you.
So I have the pleasure of taking us a little bit behind the pages with Walela. So let's start at the beginning. How did you approach this writing process for the book? And, I know it was a very personal and emotional journey. Where did you start? How did you approach it?
I didn't know I was writing a book when I was writing a book, which is one of the best ways to realize you're writing a book. So I got diagnosed when I was 23, and I wasn't able to really process my emotions, and my journal just became a safe space. And so I started writing that, read the cancer journals by Audre Lorde, and saw, wow, this can be published and other people can know what I'm going through, because I wasn't seeing it anywhere. And so then from there, met my agent, and she was like, yeah, your diary is great. And so now everyone has my diary in their hands. So it's way too personal.
It's very insidery. You touch upon themes of medical racism and health equity. In what ways do you hope that our healthcare system will change, and how do you envision the book being a part of the conversation?
I think what I would hope is for healthcare to center the dignity of a patient far more. I think oftentimes we're so focused on getting the patient to live, and it's like, but what does that living mean? Surviving is not enough. There has to be something that we live for, and oftentimes that's not centered, and it's oftentimes the whole patient is not centered, what we're all going through. And so I think when I went through cancer, I was seeing the holes in the medical industrial complex as a whole. I think ways for communities to be able to receive care as well, and for us to advocate for ourselves and be more involved in that process would be phenomenal as well. And I just think for my book, I just really hope that doctors and any medical practitioners understand this is the reality that we are going through. My story's not an anomaly, and it's part of a generation of trauma. It's a generation of this has happened over and over and over again, and that I'm incredibly just lucky to be here. Oftentimes people like me don't make it, so yeah.
Thank you. We heard the excerpt, Bless the Blood, earlier. Can you talk about the significance of the title and the meaning of the words and how you came to that?
Okay, I'm gonna be brutally honest. This was not the original title. My editor was just like, hey, this poem just makes the most sense because a lot of it is inverting on spirituality and my ancestry, and then obviously I have blood cancer. I was diagnosed with phase 3 chronic myeloid leukemia, and I hate titling anything. Any editor that I work with, I'm like, can you just write the title for me, please? So she picked it, and I just was like, cool, like let's just do it. I was like, I wrote the book. You all can pick it, but it fits great. I love it. She did a great job. So
shout out to the editor.
Shout out to Sydney.
So since the release of the book, what has been the response? What has the response been like for you?
Ooh. I think what's been really beautiful, this book is a young adult memoir. And so it has been really amazing to see kids feel like they can see themselves in me. As someone, when I was younger, I could not find myself anywhere in media, not even in influencers. To be able to provide that for them has just been immeasurable. I think also this book has provided somewhat of a cheat code for people to navigate the medical industrial complex of things that they can say to the doctor, things that they can say to family. And really it's been, wow, how I'm feeling is completely normal. Because oftentimes when we go through cancer, it's a very complex thing to go through where it sort of erupts literally everything in our lives. And so to be faced with that while also facing something that ultimately wants to kill you is just incredibly sort of treacherous. And so for people to say, this book has held me through my journey, this book has given me a mirror to things that are difficult for me, or for caregivers to even reach out and say, I understand my partner, I understand my sibling, I understand my mother so much more. That's all I want, is for this book to be a site of conversation. And so to know that it's propelling that forward is just all that I could ever ask for.
Amazing. How do you think your perspective on life and your health has changed as a result of your journey with cancer?
Ooh. Well, I wouldn't be diagnosed with a lot of things outside of cancer if I hadn't gotten diagnosed with cancer. I think also I used to view disabled as a slur. That was something like the way that society looks at disability was very jarring for me. And so when I was learning that I had like mental illnesses and other things that came with it, I was like, oh wow, I am disabled and this is not a bad thing. So I think that was something that I was really able to start embodying and learning about disability justice and learning about really the ways in which we toss disabled perspectives to the side as well. So I think for me, that was the biggest thing through my cancer journey, was that. Yeah.
I'm going to go back to for a second, something you mentioned about community, and really sounds like humanity. How have you leaned on your community, or how has your community been a circle of support for you as you've gone through this journey?
Well, what's interesting is that I relied on the internet a lot, and that's like a double-edged sword in a way. And so I'm like part of the guinea pig generation of social media, where when we're 60, they'll be doing studies on how this terrorized us. So like I think it was a really great way to be connected with other people. And then in person, I was doing a lot of community organizing, where we were hosting events called like Spit Justice, where people would share sort of their emotions and their feelings on a microphone and receive feedback. We also did hot food distribution, mutual aid. And so that was a way that sustained me, being able to give to others and also receive. I think something that I did not do through cancer, and is very evident in the book, and I hope people take from it, is that I did not ask for help as often as I needed to from the people that I loved. I really took the brunt and just was holding it in. And I think that's easy for us as patients to do, because we want everyone to feel okay. And we want everyone to be like, we're fine, we're like, because we manage other people's emotions essentially. And so I think for me, after cancer, really going through burnout and not even being able to write a sentence, and that's what my life depends on, is my writing, I had to just break down to my friends. I just was like, I can't do anything. And finally, that's when we started sort of building a care support network for me, where I could actually list out my needs. It's not just financial, it's not just the bare minimum. There's so much that goes into how we care for each other and the accommodations that we need, even if you're not disabled. Like relationship accommodations apply to everyone. And so the way in which I was able to embody that a lot more, I think now I feel a lot more full and alive. But yeah, through cancer, it was very much me alone and seeming like I was holding it together. And I think that's just like a very common trope, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. You speak passionately about your ancestors and generational trauma, and we were talking about this backstage. What was it like discovering and sharing these emotions during this whole process?
Ooh. There were ways I felt extremely connected to my ancestors, like my grandma, my granddaddy, who I both mentioned them on stage, and my great aunt who had leukemia. And so they had all died before I was 17. I was very close with them. I also was part of their caregiving in the hospital, so none of this was foreign to me. I think, unfortunately, a lot of their deaths and some of the mistreatment and neglect that they experienced informed how I was going to move through cancer, and where my mother was just telling me, you need to know your illness as well as these doctors. Like, that is just your job at this point. And so I think just viewing that, also when you are tracing genealogy, oftentimes you get the most information out of a death certificate. And seeing how many of my ancestors died by ways that were completely avoidable was very heart-wrenching and heartbreaking for me. It was very hard to write that into a book. But at the same time, also studying the work of like the Texas Freedom Colonies Project, coming across a really lovely interview by my 4th grade aunt where she talks about how she lived on a co-op with her like daughter, is just really like that. Those things bring my family to life a bit more, where I can imagine conversations with them. And so, if anything, the book is dedicated to them. Like, what's wild is, you know, oftentimes when you're Black, like, we don't have a lot of books that are for us and for our family. Like, and so that the whole book it's all of us there, and that's what it's just meant to be, as an archive. It's a living memory, and that's all I hope that we can give, and say that we were here and this is really how it went. We're not sanitizing history, we're not sanitizing medicine, we're going to tell it like it is.
Well, that is all we have time for, but I just want to say you aren't just good, Walila, you're great.
Thank you.
Here to discuss Beyond Cancer, what is survivorship care, please welcome Emily Brown, Director of the Transition Oncology Program at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, Ann Partridge, Director of the Adult Survivorship Program at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, with Claudine Abaid, Executive Director of Audio at The Atlantic.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, Dr. Brown and Dr. Partridge. I'm very excited to be with both of you today, and I want to let the audience know that at the end of the conversation, we'll have a Q&A, so be thinking of your questions, and we'll get to that later. I should start by saying that I am a cancer survivor, 2 years, and so are the other 2 women on this stage. Why don't I start with you, Dr. Partridge? I'd like to know what the key components of cancer survivorship care are, and why is it important for individuals who have completed cancer treatment to have that kind of care?
So thank you. And for those of you who, like us, probably raised your hands as a cancer survivor at the beginning of today, I think it really is important to understand what being a cancer survivor is. And you know, we've also heard today about cancer survivorship begins at diagnosis. The clinical trial that we heard about sparing people their rectums, that's about sparing their rectums for their entirety of the rest of their lives. That's a survivorship issue that plays into their early treatment. And so we need to know, though, how to help people manage the aftermath. They need to know that. And that's so that people receive the right care from the right providers at the right time, and kind of like Goldilocks. They want to get it just right and not too much care or any care falling through the cracks to optimize their long-term health. And the way I think about cancer survivorship, you can do, you know, there are lots of things on, you know, optimal survivorship, but I think about it in 4 big buckets. One is the risk of the cancer itself or new cancers appearing. And we're pretty good at that as oncologists in terms of screening and thinking about risk of recurrence, and that's kind of what's on everybody's mind. But then there are 3 other big buckets. One is the long-term late effects. That's the second big bucket, and that's things like, you know, something that either the cancer caused during the cancer treatment or that came on later. Third big bucket is health behaviors, trying to help people to take that teachable moment of a cancer diagnosis, and if you weren't exercising before or you weren't eating right before, trying to optimize that, quitting smoking, things like that. And then finally, the not so sexy but very important area is coordination of care. How do we help patients to manage the complexity of cancer care in the middle of their otherwise busy lives? So that's how I think about it, and if you take anything home from today from what I've said, those 4 big buckets, bring it to your next follow-up appointment and address them.
Dr. Brown, can you speak to survivorship care for children and adolescents? And
Absolutely, and just to kind of echo some of the same things that you've said, I think bringing in psychosocial elements to where are we from a mental health standpoint for our children and adolescents, going back to school, making sure that they have necessary accommodations in the classroom. Are they prepared to enter the workforce or go to college, secondary education? So focusing on some of those really long-term psychosocial needs as well. Mental health in our adolescents and the general population is such a hot topic right now, and you can add that on for our cancer survivors. So really making sure that the entire family is feeling supported as they're starting to navigate those steps into this early survivorship, and then helping them to be their own self-advocates and be able to have those health self-management skills to live and to thrive a long survivorship.
And if I could stay with you for a moment more, Dr. Brown, could you talk a little bit about how healthcare providers tailor those survivorship care plans to meet unique needs for each cancer?
Absolutely. So survivorship care plans, I think, can play two roles. One, it's a communication tool between the oncology team and the healthcare providers in the patient's local communities. But two, it's an educational tool. So really trying to work with our patients and families to understand, hey, this is important, why you need to know the names of the medications that you had, because they have these long-term potential side effects that you may not have problems now as a 15-year-old, but when you're 25, 30, there might be implications down the road. So it's a great communication tool, a great advocacy tool to be able to say, hey, this is my history, I know it, and here are some additional details. But that coordination of care that Dr. Partridge spoke about is so critical, because with childhood cancer, at least, it's very, very rare. Dr. Rathmel mentioned that 18 million survivors in the US, only 500,000 of those are survivors of childhood and adolescent cancers. So something that we really try to prepare patients and families to speak up for themselves and to kind of help with that coordination.
Dr. Partridge, can you talk about that a little and how that might be different in adult community?
Well, we learned a lot from the pediatric world, and they were the mavens in terms of recognizing that when you treat a child during especially any developmental phase, that cancer therapy, while well-intended, can have many unintended consequences that last a lifetime. This is also true for adults, but as you heard, there are so many more adult cancer patients and survivors. And so it's not easily scalable, exactly what you would do for children in terms of all the TLC to an adult population. And so what we've tried to do in our adult survivor populations is to meet patients where they are, to try and develop tools and resources, and so to speak, care plans are roadmaps, I like to think of them as, to help people to learn with their care teams, here's what you had, here's what we did about it, which of course, as the smoke clears, sometimes people finally recognize what's happened to them long after the treatment's over. And then here's what you need to do moving forward. So I think of it as a roadmap, and it's just so critical for people to feel like they have a plan, I think, as they move forward. And then of course, to have a group of providers that they can go to as new issues arise.
Yeah, we were talking backstage about how, in my own personal experience, as I was going through treatment, people would say, oh, and later when you're picking up the pieces, and I was thinking, I don't know what pieces you're talking about. I'm just like getting through this treatment, right? And you don't think about that until you're deep in it, I think. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the specific kinds of challenges that cancer survivors will face and do face when they're transitioning from active treatment to survivorship care. And how we might how you address these challenges.
Well, it's a little bit like when the casseroles go away, and people they look back to normal. If they had chemotherapy, their hair may be back. They're covering up their scars, but the scars, both literally and figuratively, have not gone away. And patients are often kind of rebuilding or remanaging their new normal, so to speak. And it really is a matter of being able to identify that for many people from a sociological and psychological perspective, and then figure out how to move on so that they can thrive in their survivorship. And there are lots of tools for that that patients can use and that clinicians can direct them to, which I think is the important thing, connecting the dots, making sure that, and a lot of our programs surround that, helping our providers of cancer care, whether they're at our institution or whether elsewhere, and we have websites and all kinds of resources available for patients that we can send them to when they're not at our own institution, making sure patients are able to connect to that, or their clinicians are able to connect them to that for additional tools, information, and resources to get them where they need to be.
And Dr. Brown, I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about the challenges, and I'm thinking about them when it comes to pediatrics in two different buckets. I mean, you have children, but then you have teenagers and teenagers who are transitioning to adulthood. Could you talk a little bit about that? I know your personal experience also might speak to
Right, yeah. I was a 17-year-old when I was diagnosed with leukemia. So I think that one of the challenges of that kind of gray zone of our later adolescents and our young adults, that are emerging adults in their early 20s, is really being able to, we talked a lot about navigation today, really navigate that world. Pediatric world is very different from the adult world. And you've got your parents taking care of you and answering questions for you and making sure you get to appointments on time and trying to really become an adult at the same time you're trying to manage all of these added healthcare things. So I think one of the most important things is just information, right? We give so much anticipatory guidance during treatment. Here's what's possible side effects you might have. Here are the next set of scans. So I think it's important to carry that out throughout the field of survivorship. So messaging early and often. Here's what you might experience. Here's what you might expect. Yeah, the end of treatment isn't the end, right? You're going to still have some mixed emotions and you might have some difficulties coming up, but here's what we want to do to prepare you. So just making sure that, especially for our teens and emerging adults, that they have those opportunities to practice healthcare self-management, that we encourage parents to let your adolescent go and make that appointment or go refill that medication or fill out the paperwork, those kind of things, all those little practical steps, because we want them to be successful survivors, not just survivors, right?
Yeah, that's some executive functioning skills right there, that it's even difficult with teenagers who aren't dealing with the challenge of cancer. So one thing I'm curious about, we've heard today about trends in young adults being diagnosed with cancer, and so it sort of leads me to thinking about how survivorship care has evolved over time, and in particular, like what advancements have been made to address long-term effects of cancer treatment now that we know people are getting diagnosed younger and living longer in a cancer survivorship kind of state.
So when I first started doing cancer in general, which was about 25 years ago, and then in the last decade or so, I focused on survivorship. One of the reasons was that we didn't have enough information around cancer survivorship because we were so focused on trying to make more survivors, appropriately so. And we still need to keep our feet on the gas with regard to continuing to treat cancer more effectively. Obviously, far too many people still suffer and succumb to cancer. But as we've grown our treatments and gotten much more advanced and we have that many more cancer survivors, it's a new area that we need to focus more on, again, helping people to manage the issues that arise either early on or late. And it's been an exciting area, but one that needs no less than treating the cancer, research. And so focusing on what are the really important questions, and with the help of our government through the NCI and other groups, we've defined what are the big research areas for cancer survivorship, and then trying to kind of stepwise answer those questions. In the area that I work, so I focus on breast cancer, and I take care of young women with breast cancer. And one of the biggest issues that's come up over the years is it safe to have a baby after breast cancer? And so we've been committed to understanding the feasibility and safety of that so important, thriving issue for so many young survivors, not just breast cancer survivors, but other cancer survivors.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I'll add that when we think about survivorship, often, at least in pediatrics, we kind of focus a little bit on that 5-year survivor. Okay, now we enter into kind of that long-term survivorship focus. And so one of the things that we're really looking at St. Jude is what's happening in those first few years. We're done with treatment, but we're not kind of in that long-term phase yet. And so what can we do during that phase in order to promote healthy lifestyles, in order to promote close monitoring, watching out for side effects, to really be able to support patients and families. So maybe some of the physical and psychosocial issues that they're having long term, can we back those up and can we do something about them earlier rather than waiting till later?
Yeah, so speaking about psychosocial issues, I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about beyond medical support. What are the supportive services and resources that are available to cancer survivors to help them cope, with physical, emotional, practical challenges that arise in this period?
Yeah, so I think mental health support is absolutely huge. I think normalizing that is a really important thing to do, to say, hey, expect this. You may need this. Make it feel like it's not something unusual, right? It's kind of part of the cancer journey that might be a support mechanism that you need. This doesn't necessarily have to be somebody in your at your oncologist location. This could be somebody in the community, making sure that you're just connected and when you need it. Making sure that, I know for our children and adolescents, school is such a huge support. That's where they're spending most of their day. So making sure that teachers have the resources they need, guidance counselors have the resources they need to be able to support patients. And then families, right? It's parents are going back to work after their child's treatment. And so making sure that they've got those available support groups to get with each other. We've got parent mentor programs where we can match parents together who have walked through similar things. We're exploring some adolescent peer mentor programs. So really being able to connect those people who can really talk to and have lived that similar experience as well.
Can I ask, have you seen a change in how schools are able to support students who come back to school who have had cancer?
I think one of the things that we're really focusing on is educating patients and parents about what are their rights under the law, that they can advocate for a child to have a 504 plan or an individualized education plan. We've created materials to send back to the schools that say, hey, these are some things to consider about your student who has just gone through cancer therapy. They might be a little bit more fatigued. They might have some cognitive challenges. So, they may need some additional support. So really being able to kind of attack it from both ways, from the school standpoint, providing that information, but also really educating patients and parents as well.
Dr. Partridge, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how the healthcare system can improve access to survivorship care for underserved populations and also reaching people in rural areas.
So critical, and this is where I think the pandemic and technology can really help us. Much of survivorship care is about counseling and plugging people in with resources. A physical exam is important, but that's something that can happen even by a PCP. It doesn't even often have to be an oncologist in follow-up for many survivors. And so here's where I think we can take advantage of virtual visits, of kind of self-service type interventions where people can kind of answer a question or questionnaire about here are the symptoms they're experiencing and here is the information that you would be fed once you endorse a particular symptom or concern. We're actually doing some research right now focusing on that very aspect of trying to get the care to people tailored to their unique concerns and problems. And it seems to be a very efficient and tailored way to get people therapy and informational resources without having to have an actual real healthcare provider there with them. But these are all works in progress, and there are many challenges, I think, to getting to patients who are harder to reach. Lots of work going on there.
Are there disparities in survivorship care outcomes among different demographic groups?
Absolutely. And again, one of the biggest places we see disparities are with the usual social determinants of health parameters, very young adult, not pediatric, but the young adult populations tend to have disparate outcomes, particularly when they come from underrepresented in medicine minority groups. And so many of us are working on ways to get more community-oriented navigators to help to navigate patients who might not otherwise, as you heard from Dr. Barakat earlier, be able to jump to the front of the line for either the care or the clinical trial, trying to meet the patients where they are and guide them. But it's very, very challenges, but there are a lot of initiatives going on trying to fix that problem.
Can you tell me a little bit about those initiatives?
Sure. So most comprehensive cancer centers and the National Cancer Institute have deep roots that they are trying to make even deeper and reach further out to reach rural patients, to reach patients who come from underrepresented in medicine groups through both virtual use, like that virtual clinical trials office that you heard about, trying to get people more into the communities. Because most adult cancer care happens in community centers, not at the big comprehensive cancer centers, and getting the tools out to the providers caring for them. And then, of course, making initiatives that the care in survivorship is actually paid for. So there are important political initiatives that need to happen to make sure that that kind of care counseling and supportive care work is reimbursed.
Are you seeing disparities in the childhood cancer community as well?
Absolutely. And I think financial toxicity is that toxicity that doesn't get talked about enough, right? We think about cardiac toxicity, we think about, bone health and things like that, but that financial toxicity, it takes a toll on the entire family. From that pediatric adolescent perspective, then you've got that family, this child is growing up now in potentially without a lot of resources. And so really trying to, you mentioned the community base, really trying to help patients connect with resources in their communities. We're working with patients from all 50 states, and so can't have an expertise about all of those communities, so trying to help patients navigate what is available in their spaces, and just really acknowledging too, and making sure to ask those questions, not just assuming somebody is not, they're not following through on this and making a judgment, but asking why. Maybe it's because mom works 2 jobs and can't have any childcare and can't get to her follow-up appointments. Maybe it's because of other psychosocial reasons that patients aren't following through with the recommendations. And so really taking time to explore those things and acknowledge those things goes a long way.
My most vivid experience of this was I had a patient who I was seeing in survivorship, and one of the things we focus on when we think about long-term late effects and their future risks is their genetics. And she had not had genetic testing at the very beginning of her diagnosis. She was a young breast cancer survivor, a Black woman from the inner city near where I work. And I had said, well, let's get her in and get her tested so we can understand her future risks, because there's a higher likelihood she might have a genetic predisposition. And she didn't want to go get tested, and I was trying to understand it. And she basically was worried about what was going on in her home. There had been a gunshot down the street that week, and she was worried about her job and being able to get in for more Dana-Farber time and more testing. And when I realized that, I said, the last thing this woman, and she said it to me, the last thing I have to worry about right now is some future cancer I might not get. She was really focused on the here and now. And so what I had to do essentially was bring the counseling to her. And we had just adopted a virtual program, even pre-pandemic, where we were starting to counsel people virtually, and were able to collect their saliva to get their tissue more virtually. They could just send it in from home rather than having to force her to come back into the cancer center for another visit. So once I understood her reasoning for not wanting this care, we were able to overcome it. But that's how disparities happen. When you're not aware of your risks, you're less likely to get the services that might mitigate that risk. And so for this particular patient, it was a good story, and fortunately she tested negative, which was good too.
And it does sound like, and we had heard a little bit today about the coordinating in all the different parts of, not just the medical community, but in the community. And so I wonder, like, advocacy feels like it's an important piece of what you're talking about here, so that people can get out to folks and let them know what there's available for them. Sounds like an important step. I'm wondering what ongoing or even new research is being conducted so that we can further enhance survivorship care and improve the quality of life for cancer survivors.
I can speak a little. I think in terms of kind of this early phase of survivorship, just that transition off of treatment, we're really trying to understand, what do patients want to know? What information needs do they have? What specific physical needs do they have? What care coordination challenges do they have? This hasn't, at least in pediatrics, this time frame of these first few years after treatment hasn't been well researched, well documented, well supported. So our program is unique in that we're really trying to establish those things and monitor and closely follow patients, and asking all of those questions as we're moving through that, so that we can kind of be able to better prepare patients in the future. So just trying to understand what is it that our patients need, and you do that by asking and listening to patients, right? Our Patient Family Advisory Council helps us, but just having those conversations and those set times to be able to check in, because the patient may be doing great and think things are going beautifully, all of their scans are clear, but then when you sit and ask and say, hey, what else is going on? Oh yeah, we just lost our health insurance, and now, she's 10, she doesn't have health insurance anymore, so it's going to be a while before we can make that appointment with that specialist. So just asking those questions, I think, is important, and paying attention to the psychosocial elements as much as the physical elements as well.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think, there's research going on in all the areas of the big buckets that I alluded to earlier. There's a whole science behind, for example, why do people get a second cancer when they've had one cancer? It's not all genetics. And can we understand that better and then get in the way of that, intercept that before someone might have a second problem or get heart failure from a therapy they received 20 years ago. And so there's a lot of research that needs to be done around that. And then there's a huge amount of research that's going on around trying to deliver the services we already know about. So healthcare delivery research, and get what we already know to patients so that they can have better survivorship and survival, ultimately.
And you told me about an app.
Yeah, so we're actually working on a web-based and app-based program to deliver survivorship care to our young survivors who are just too busy to come in for frequent visits, and they would rather self-serve in the middle of the night on their phones. And so we've created this intervention that we're now testing to try and understand whether or not telling us how they feel and then getting tailored information based on what they tell us will improve their symptoms, because hopefully they'll listen to, read and inform themselves about how to make them better, as well as their unique concerns. So we'll see if it works, but it's being tested right now. And then hopefully we'll get it more widely available for patients.
Well, I imagine that one of the joyful parts of your work is seeing the benefits of survivorship care programs. And so I'm wondering if you can share any success stories.
So I saw a lady yesterday who was on a study of ours, which was about trying to have babies after breast cancer. And we studied in an international trial whether or not it was safe to take a pause from their endocrine therapy, which we do to reduce their chances of breast cancer recurrence, to have a baby and then get back on. You can't stay on the therapy while you're pregnant, but you can take a break and then you can get back on. And we studied this across the world, literally. And this patient came in and saw me, and we were talking about the results, and the results punchline is that it does appear to be safe. which was a very cool finding and has been wonderful for many people who weren't on the trial but are interested in future fertility. And this lady had been on the trial, and she was sharing with me just how grateful she was to have been able to be on this study, to contribute. She didn't have to be on a study to get pregnant, right? She could have done that without us, but she was willing to contribute her time, her efforts to help educate patients and help us to learn for future patients. So, and she was crying because she actually wants a second child, and we were counseling her about that, but it was just, I was very grateful, and it's very fun to see that when you're trying to help people manage these things.
Thank you so much for that story and for both of your time today. We have run out of time, and I think I might have blown through the Q&A session. I might get in trouble for that. I apologize. For those of you that have questions, but thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And now, for a conversation and performance on the healing power of music, please welcome singer-songwriter Bianca Muniz with the Atlantic's Claudine Abaid.
Hi, Bianca.
Hi.
I'm so excited to be with you today, and I'm back. Hello. I'd love to just jump in with you.
Definitely.
And if you could just share with us a little bit about your personal experience with cancer and how it's impacted your life.
Yeah, I am a 3-time cancer survivor. The first time I was diagnosed was 11 years old with ovarian cancer, which my mom found when we were in the doctors getting x-rays on my knees. I was laying down and my stomach was protruding, and she thought I was sticking it out, and we went back and forth a whole bunch. She realized I wasn't lying, I wasn't sticking out my stomach, and so the doctors sent me immediately to the ER, and a few days later I had my first major abdominal surgery to remove an ovary and try to debulk as much as possible. And then I went through 6 months of chemo and was considered NED for about 11 years, and then I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 22. And I found that myself because after ovarian cancer, I became super aware of my body and decided that I really wanted to get to know myself. And I started doing self-checks, looking at my skin, feeling my chest. And I kept finding lumps throughout high school, and we would biopsy them, we'd do ultrasounds, and they kept turning out to be nothing. I was told I had dense breasts. And then my senior year of college, I found one that felt so different from the others. And it was super small, but I knew it was different. And my doctor told me that she didn't want to turn me into a cutting board and that we just keep an eye on it. But then I graduated, I lost my college insurance, had to get a new insurance, and then ultimately a whole new team. And by the time I went back in, it was almost exactly a year later, and it had grown so much, and there were so many other ones, and it was just so evident that it was breast cancer. And at that point, I finally got genetic testing done, and I have a mutation called TP53, which basically means my tumor suppressing gene is broken. And so I had a double mastectomy, went through a year of treatment, and then once again considered NED. And I joined a study for my specific mutation where I get full body MRIs every year. And in one of the MRIs, it showed that maybe there was a blood clot somewhere. So we went looking for this blood clot. I had a chest scan, and that's when we saw there was a little tumor on my lung. And I had the option of getting either a biopsy, which was invasive, or just removing it. And I chose to remove it due to my track record and knowing my mutation. And it turned out to be lung cancer. So I had a segmentectomy, and we caught it so early that I didn't need treatment for that. So I'm super grateful. And now I'm 29, and I have my scans coming up next month.
Can I just say how glad we are that you're here? Right? I mean, this is an arduous journey. How did you navigate? How are you navigating the emotional and psychological aspects of this?
I feel like because I was diagnosed so young, I grew up with this being my life, like the doctors, the surgeries, treatment, like it's just been a part of my life for so long. And when I was 11, my parents tried to hide it from me for a little while, but obviously I was having surgeries and whatnot. And when they finally told me, my response was, if I'm alive, then I'm fine. And that's kind of been my motto throughout life. I'm alive, I'm here, I'm breathing, I'm fine. And that kind of hasn't changed. It's taught me to really be present and live life as much as possible, do what I want, do what makes me happy, what brings me passion, what brings me joy, and to, just not let cancer stop me from living.
That's amazing, I have to say. Can you tell us about any unique experiences or challenges that you faced as a woman of color, accessing cancer screenings, diagnosis, treatment, that kind of thing?
My biggest obstacle has been with the GYN. I still don't have one. When I went in, I think 2 years ago, it had taken so long to get an appointment. And you'd think someone with my mutation who's already had ovarian cancer, it would be simple, but it wasn't easy to get in. And I wanted to talk to her about maybe getting an oophorectomy or just what my options are with that, because I had triple positive breast cancer, so it's affected by hormones. And I struggle with hormonal imbalances. I have something called PMDD, so it's like a super severe version of PMS, which wreaks absolute havoc on my emotions every single month for half the month. And so I wanted to see what my options were and like maybe talk about HRT, hormone replacement therapy, to maybe help my imbalance. And she just negated everything I said, and I was wrong. Like, I didn't feel heard at all. I was completely dismissed. And so 2 years later now, I still don't have a GYN. I never went back to her. I'm looking for someone new. I saw a nurse practitioner just for the checkup, but I still don't have anyone to actually hear me and help me come up with solutions for the things that I'm dealing with. I'm grateful for the rest of my teams. Everyone else listens to me and actually helps me advocate for myself, but the GYN, I've had not great experiences with many of them.
Man, not a great story, but maybe there are people here today that can help you find the right person to navigate. I'm confident. You're a musician.
Yeah.
And finding inspiration for creativity can be a challenge in the best of circumstances. And you have managed to find creativity under difficult circumstances. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship between music and healing?
Oh my gosh, it's been there since the beginning. When I was 11, I had just gotten the lead in the school musical. And I refused to drop out of school. I refused to give up my part. And
wait, what was the part? What was the?
It was Gabriella in High School Musical.
Oh.
Yeah, I was very excited.
The ultimate.
I got a wig that matched the outfit. But I made a deal with my doctors that I would keep eating, I would keep moving, I would keep my numbers high, but if my numbers dropped, then I would either wear a mask or, depending how low they were, I wouldn't go at all. So that gave me motivation to do everything in my power to keep myself feeling good and as healthy as possible. And so I would practice my lines to the nurses and sing to the doctors. And that just gave me something to look forward to every week. And at that point, I wasn't writing my own music yet. But then with my breast cancer diagnosis, I had started writing by that point. And when I was diagnosed again, it became an outlet for everything. And when I sit down to write a song, I don't think about what I'm writing. I let the music flow through me. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, this is about, depression, or this is about wanting to believe in something bigger than I am. And performing it it brings me back every time to that healing that writing it gave me.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about your writing process and what do you hope that people who listen to your music will take away?
Well, I hope that it can help heal people or hold them through whatever journey and obstacles they're going through. And as for writing it, I usually strum on my guitar, or I play something on my guitar, and then I just sing. And whatever comes out, comes out. I'll press record on my phone and just go for anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour and just sing. And then I'll listen back to it later and pick apart what I was singing and get an idea of what it's about. Both of the songs that I'm going to play today, I basically wrote in one sitting. It just came out, and they're both very much about my journey. And I find that those are the easiest ones to write about because it's so deeply ingrained in me, and I need that healing, I need that release.
It sounds like you've sort of created a survivorship plan for yourself, and it's a musical one. And do you write every day?
I don't write every day. I don't always play every day. If I'm traveling, it's kind of hard to do that. But I listen to music every day. I sing every day, even if I don't have my guitar. It's important for my mental health.
Well, can you tell me if you're working on something new?
I am. I'm actually working on an album with my sister. She's also a singer-songwriter. And we just released a song last month, our first one together, and it's the first one I've actually produced myself, because usually I just write the music, but I decided to take on the production behind it as well. So that's been a fun and challenging new endeavor. But yeah, we're working on a new album together, and it seems to be revolving around mental health.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. She's going to stay with us. We're going to get to hear her music, but thank you for sharing your story with us. I can't wait to hear your music. You can find Bianca's music on Spotify. We'll have a QR code on the screen when the programming concludes. But I will leave, and now here she is with her two songs, As You Are and Believe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. This first song I'm going to play you is called Believe, and I wrote it for a friend who was going through metastatic cancer. Something more than what you see. I want you to give it a try and let yourself be free. Yeah, I know that it can be hard to close your eyes and just let it go. And although it may seem like the world is against you, no, you're not alone. Trust in me, just believe you'll be free. I like to think that there's more to this life than pain and suffering. But I know that we can survive no matter what the world brings. Yeah, I know it's hard to love yourself in every single scar. So hold on, even when you're falling apart, 'cause it starts in our hearts. Believe, trust in me, just believe. No, I won't give up, so you don't give up for me. Yeah, I'm still alive, and with life there is no guarantee. So I'm gonna live, and I'm gonna live for me. Just open your heart and give love in everything. So you don't give up for me. Yeah, I'm still alive, and with life there is no guarantee. So I'm gonna live, and I'm gonna live for me. Oh, just open your heart and give love and everything. Trust in me, just believe you'll be free. Believe, trust in me, just believe you'll be free. You'll be free. Just believe you'll be free. Just believe. Thank you. I have one more for you. This next one is called As You Are, and I wrote this during my breast cancer journey, and it's about self-love and loving myself, and that's all that matters. As long as I love myself, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks.
This is love. I'm never far. I did not come to judge you, no, I only wanna love you so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Open up, come as you are. Reaching out beyond the stars, beyond the ridge or doubt. We're going far. I did not come to judge you, no, I only wanna love you so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Open up, come as you are. I am here. Lift your fears. No, 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 no. I will never leave you. In my heart, I'll keep you. So open up, come as you are. This is love. I'm never far. I did not come to judge you, no, I only want to love you so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Open up, come as you are. Open up, come as you are. This is love. I'm never far. I did not come to judge you, no, I only wanna love you so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Open up, come as you are.
Thank you.
Please welcome back to the stage the Atlantic's Candace Montgomery.